Chapter 1185. Wang Xiuqing and Huang Yuqing immediately began to sweat profusely. They left their chairs and knelt on the ground. Yang Guangdou, who was sitting cross-legged, smiled as he watched this scene. He did not help the two officials in their hour of need, nor did he say anything bad about them. Su Fengnian stopped smiling. He rested his elbow on the edge of the chair and calmly said, "One is in charge of commanding the troops stationed in Luzhou. The other is in charge of monitoring the officials in Luzhou. Both of them are important positions in Luzhou. The two of you together, not including the calligraphy and paintings, gave Li Gongda a total of 68,000 taels of silver. Only then did you get the letter of recommendation. However, this king had already looked through your resumes and checked your past achievements. You were very good, so he agreed. What? Are you so worried about the money that you are in such a hurry to plunder the land in Luzhou? Why don't the two of you make your move a little later? It seems like your skills as an official are not perfect enough." Wang Xiuqing, the Fufeng County Commandant Yu Wanqing and Wenhui County Magistrate Li Zhaoshou, as well as the two people you promoted, Wu Shaoxian and Hong Pashu, received a total of 6,000 taels of silver. Is this king wrong? Su Fengnian's finger gently tapped on the edge of the chair. The chair was made of the highest quality yellow rosewood. It was a valuable item left behind by the previous owner of Qingcang City. It made people envious. Su Fengnian did not speak. Wang Xiuqing, who was tall and strong, did not look like a civil official. He was about to speak when his in-law, Huang Yuqing, secretly pulled on his sleeve. In the end, the two officials who had neglected their duties in Luzhou did not say anything to defend themselves. Su Fengnian saw a tall and sturdy general walk into the courtyard. He stood outside the door with his hand on his sword. It was Luzhou's Qingcang Army Commandant, Wei Chengshi. He and the commandant of Linyao Army Commandant were both from the Longxiang Army. Su Fengnian stood up and said, "This king has told Governor Yang that he will be in charge of all government affairs in Lu Province. If you have anything to say, you can tell it to Governor Yang." Su Fengnian walked out of the house and followed Wei Chengcheng and a group of elite retainers out of the city. They were going to meet Chen Shiliang at a place 40 miles away from the city. Yang Guangdou coughed and put down his feet, stepping on the boots that had just been delivered from Lingzhou's Golden Weave Bureau. He said, "Se Huang, please rise. The law is based on human feelings. There are many things that need to be done in Liuzhou. With such a huge mess, I am unable to find anyone that will not hinder the great cause of Bailiang. Even if you all redeem yourselves by doing good deeds, I will help you all speak to His Highness. However, while His Highness is in the Azure continent, it's best that you don't show your faces." Wang Xiuqing stood up, his expression heavy. Huang Yuqing stood up unsteadily and wiped the sweat from his forehead as if he had lost his parents. Even if the provincial governor had given them leeway, they had left a bad impression in the prince's mind. Did they really think that they could make up for their mistakes with merit? Huang Yuqing was not so childish, but he was still grateful for Yang Guangdou's consolation. He bowed deeply with his hands clasped in front. As he bowed and lowered his head, he caught a glimpse of his in-law, Wang Xiuqing, who was still standing there in a daze. He did not want to add fuel to the fire, so he pretended not to see anything. Yang Guangdou smiled and looked at the unconvinced soldier. He did not get angry. He put on his boots and stepped on the ground. He smiled and said, "Sir Wang, do you think that I am playing the villain in front of His Highness?" The unyielding Wang Xiuqing indeed thought so. However, he did not expect Governor Yang to be so direct. He was startled and his gloomy face lightened a bit. Yang Guangdou waved his hand and laughed. "Then you are underestimating this official too much, and underestimating His Highness even more. This official does not have His Highness's ability. I cannot find out how much money you have given out, nor can I find out how much money you have accepted. In fact, everyone here is well aware that Lu Province is a barren land, and being an official here is a hard job. But no matter how little money there is, to be able to sit on a yellow rosewood chair in this room, your official rank is solid. Even the imperial court has recognized you, and all of us have received the official documents from the capital. This official has also received the title of Governor Yang Guangdou. As for me, I am very busy. There are many things that I do not want to be complicated. Think about it. Yu Wanqing, Li Zhaoshou, Wu Shaoxian, and Hong Pashu. These four people, I have heard of them. They are similar to the two of you. Their family background is not great. They must have worked hard to become an official. Speaking to this point, Yang Guangdou rubbed his chin and could not help but laugh. Of the four, this official is most familiar with Li Zhaoshou. A month ago, I even chatted with him. This person is indeed full of knowledge. What is funny is that at that time, the Weaving Bureau had just sent over the official robes and had not yet sent over the boots. This kid was wearing a brand new robe and a pair of broken shoes. When we were chatting, he would occasionally touch the soft patch on his chest as if he was touching the face of a beautiful young lady. It made him very happy. At that time, this official was thinking that he did not want to be a county magistrate in Lingzhou, and came to Luzhou to be a county magistrate. He was promoted but lost money. This kind of person is still a true scholar. In his heart, he still has the strength of a scholar. Yang Guangdou looked at Wang Xiuqing and laughed softly. I know what you are thinking. I am just helping people get an official position because I like their character and knowledge. I have more money in my purse, and I have also found talents for Beiliang. This is a good thing for both sides. What right do you, King of Beiliang, have to not let it go? Wang Xiuqing, is this what you are thinking? Wang Xiuqing was honest and unyielding. She said in a low voice. That's right. Yang Guangdou shook his head and said, You are wrong. Whether it is you or even me, the primary third-rank provincial governor of Luzhou, we cannot escape the problem of not being in a position and not being in a position. For example, I do not have many people at my disposal and am unable to make ends meet. According to the law, you should be stripped of your official status and be sent back to Lingzhou. However, I still have to clean up your mess. This is how I, Yang Guangdou, only consider the gains and losses of Luzhou. However, if every soldier and official in Beiliang is like you too and does not need to follow the rules, as time passes, the mud and sand will fall together. This Beiliang's officialdom will be in complete chaos. That is why what I said before is not entirely correct. You have to talk about human feelings, but if you talk about human feelings too much, it will not be a long-term plan. Look at Lingzhou's officialdom. You bunch of pitiful fellows who have not been able to make a name for yourselves in the past 20 years. You must know this better than me. Ask yourselves, will Luzhou become the second Lingzhou? We are about to go to war. Us officials who do not even need to wave flags and shout battle cries should not let the prince worry about this so early. When we destroy Beimang, everyone here will be in a favorable position. Everyone can go to Beimang and get a provincial governor to satisfy their cravings. At that time, we will be greedy for some money. I do not believe that the king of Beiliang will be so calculative with us. Wang Xiuqing cracked open her lips into a smile. Many of the officials present could not help but laugh. Lu Zhen joked, then us old bones should live a few more years. Otherwise, no matter how big the official status is, it will have nothing to do with us. Yang Guangdou pointed at the youngest official in charge of Liuzhou's financial records. Xianxia, you're only in your early 40s. You're the one who has the most advantage. When the quarterly salary is distributed, treat us to a meal. That person scratched his head and said with a bitter face, It is not that this official is unwilling to part with the salary. It is just that there is a lioness at home. If I do not send the salary back to Yuzhou, she will definitely think that this official is picking wildflowers in Luzhou. At that time, she will definitely punish me to death. Provincial governor, please do a good deed and let official Zhou, who has the most money in our family, treat us. This fellow will not be interested in the salary. A fat middle-aged official cursed, Xianxia, King Bullsh T. Yesterday, you even told me that you had secretly saved up more than 40 taels of money for drinks. The entire hall burst into laughter. It was joyous. When Su Fengnian saw Chen Shiliang, he almost did not recognize him. This poor scholar who originally looked like a weak scholar had tanned skin and lost more than 10 catties. Chapter 1186. Chen Shiliang did not wear the fourth-rank official robes of Qingcang City. He did not even wear the scholar's clothing. He looked no different from a poor refugee. From head to toe, the only thing that could be brought out was the pair of abnormally sturdy wolf skin boots on his feet. When Su Fengnian personally saw this person who looked even more like a refugee than a refugee, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, Chen Shiliang had more than 10 white horses protecting him. For better or for worse, this scholar who was at the heart of the struggle in Beiliang gained back some face. At this moment, Chen Shiliang was standing at the entrance of a village. He was leading a large group of workers to build a windmill and dig a well. The village just happened to be located in a low-lying area with spring water. It was a small oasis that was rarely seen in Lu province. Normally speaking, a place like this that occupied a water source was a place that many factions would fight over. When there was water, it often meant that there would be endless bloodshed. The 100 or so villagers of this village all squatted in the distance to join in on the fun. Some men chewed on steel-like pancakes, while others looked at the white horse righteous followers with a mixture of desire and awe. After dismounting, they still carried blades and crossbows, and their armor was bright. Before Lu province became part of Beiliang's territory, before the elite soldiers of the border army became crossbowmen, they would come here to kill people, using the heads of the refugees as capital to advance. Occasionally, a small group of cavalry would be surrounded and killed by large groups of mounted bandits. The blades and armor on the cavalry had always been the things that the leaders of the refugees could show off. With horses and blades, if they could also wear armor, then they could be the boss of bosses in the land of the refugees. That was why when these white horse righteous followers appeared out of nowhere, not only did it make the villagers envious, it also made them tremble with fear. However, the young man in the lead was said to be a Beiliang official with a frighteningly high official hat. What was strange was that when he entered the village, he did not violate the women, nor did he steal money or food. He only said a bunch of things, making it so that the villagers would not believe him even if they were beaten to death. Was there such a good thing in the world? As long as one person from each family joined the army, they would be registered as a good citizen in Lingzhou, and they would even be able to farm. Also, whether they joined the army at the border or within Lingzhou, they could choose as they pleased. The only difference was that the soldiers of the border army received a lot more pay than the soldiers of Lingzhou. Originally, no one was willing to pay attention to him, but later on, it was said that this young official had stubbornly defended Qingcang City against 10,000 strong mounted bandits. It was said that he had caused the deaths of many of the king of Beiliang's personal troops, and was to be brought back to Liangzhou to be executed in public. 2. When the villagers saw another group of horses galloping over, they stopped outside the village. A young man who looked even more handsome than a woman gradually approached. Beside him was a small child that looked like charcoal. Behind him was a tall and sturdy man who looked like a general. His attire was really king eye-piercing. No matter what, he should be a general that could lead several hundred soldiers. Some of the brats who were born and raised in the village were not afraid of anything. They wanted to go around half a circle to take a good look, but in the end, they were chased far away by their elders. However, there were some strong women who could knock down men from Jiangnan with one hand. Their eyes were shining. Oh, what a handsome little brother. Who knows which family's woman has the good fortune to enjoy him? Their men didn't care about this. They kept cursing and swearing, and the women also dared to talk back. The bolder ones even smacked their thick lips, wishing they could swallow that little brother with a pair of phoenix eyes into their stomachs. Soon, all of the villagers were scared out of their wits. Their scalps were numb. When the white horse righteous Tsong saw the young man, he knelt down on one knee. With one hand on the ground and the other on his blade, he said in a deep voice, "We pay our respects to the prince." When the white horse righteous Tsong knelt down, the officials in charge of digging the well in Luzhou also knelt down. They were even more reverent than the solemn white horse righteous Kong. In this period of time first, there were many bald monks who worked hard in Luzhou, begging for alms and preaching. Later, there were also young immortals from Wudong Mountain who came here to travel. They all said that the young vassal king was either the reincarnation of a bodhisattva or the descent of Jianghu. Su Fengnian said softly and stood up. He then walked towards Chen Shiliang. The dozen or so white horse righteous Tsong naturally followed behind the king of Beiliang. They separated the Azure commandant's retinue without leaving a trace. Wei Chengchen rubbed his nose. He was a little embarrassed, but he did not dare to show any dissatisfaction. During the Battle of Azure City, there was a great disparity in military strength. Although the defending side always had an innate advantage, the city walls of Azure City were not tall and sturdy. The thousands of soldiers of Azure City had already lost their morale. If it were not for the white horse righteous Tsong who led the charge, Azure City would have already been massacred by the 10,000 elite horse bandits several times. Every time there was a hole in the city's defense, a group of silver-armored soldiers would take the lead and desperately resist the tide of attacks. Although they died, they did not retreat. It was these white horse righteous Tsong who said that their lives were worth the lives of 100 people of Azure City, And it was their willingness to die that caused the old subordinates of the Azure Dragon King Manor to have the heart to fight to the death. The desperation of Qingcang City's attack and defense could be seen from one detail. Every White Horse righteous follower who died would die without a complete corpse because they were hated to the bones by the horse bandits. After the Dragon Elephant army rushed to the rescue and the horse bandits retreated after hearing the news, Qingcang City could only collect the corpses and pile up almost empty coffins. When Chen Shiliang saw Su Fengnian, there was some guilt on his face. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. Su Fengnian patted his shoulder and then sat down on the mouth of the well. Raising his head, he said with a smile, "Do you want to return to the prince's mansion and be an aide without any rank, or do you want to be the second in command in Liuzhou? It's up to you." Chen Shiliang casually squatted on the edge of the well. This was very different from the reserved etiquette he had in the past on Mount Qingliang. He said softly, "Although I'm still very afraid of personally seeing people die, I've always wanted to go to Mount Qingliang to talk about strategy on paper. Even if I can't be a rich and idle person there, at least I won't have to worry about anything. But now, I feel that if I just pat my butt and leave, I'll be a deserter." Back then, in Azure City, not a single one of the prince's White Horse righteous Tsong retreated. The several thousand armored soldiers of Azure City did not retreat, and even the refugees in the city did not retreat. "If I leave now it won't be right?" Su Fengnian asked. "Then you agree to be Liuzhou's aide?" Provincial Governor Yang also has the same intention. He values you very much. With the two of you as partners in Liuzhou, I'll be at ease. Chen Shiliang shook his head and said, "Aid is the most important aid of a province. If it was Lingzhou, where Bailiang's backyard is far away from the battlefield, I'm confident that I can still manage it. But Liuzhou's current appointment system is inclined towards people who can be both civil and martial. I think I'll pass. I'll focus on being the governor of Azure City first. In any case, as long as I think of something, I'll tell the provincial governor frankly. I don't need an aide." Su Fengnian did not make things difficult for him. He nodded and said, "As you wish. In any case, when the time comes and you feel that you want to be a high-ranking official, you can go to Yangguang and ask for his official hat. You don't need to inform Mount Qingliang." Azure officer Wei Cheng stood nearby. When he heard this conversation, his heart was in turmoil. Where in the world could he find such an easygoing vassal king? How could he casually choose his official hat? It could be seen that the rumors about the king of Bailiang wanting to deal with Chen Shiliang were all nonsense. Wei Cheng had long heard of the two popular figures of Mount Qingliang, Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang. Within Bailiang, Su Beiji's achievements and ability far surpassed Chen Shiliang's. His governance of Lingzhou was both firm and soft. It was said that he was about to overpower the head of the civil officials, the administrator, Li Gongda. However, Wei Cheng still thought more highly of Chen Shiliang. There was no reason to speak of. Just based on this scholar, he was able to defend Azure City to the death. Moreover, he really managed to defend it. Chen Shiliang suddenly said, "Has your highness been to the cenotaph?" Su Fengnian said, "I just entered the city last night. I wanted to go with you to offer wine." Chapter 1187. Chen Shiliang nodded and stood up. He waved his hand and called the head of the workshop to come over, and whispered the relevant matters to him. At this time, a tall and strong young man walked out of the group of odd job workers and walked towards them. Soon, he was stopped by two white horse riders. The cold sword in his hand was half an inch away from the scabbard, and his killing intent was very strong. Su Fengnian glanced at the youth and realized that he was actually an acquaintance of his. Back then, he had entered the land of the refugees by himself and encountered a lot of twists and turns outside the village outside of Azure Sky City. The refugees were so greedy that they forgot about their lives and wanted to rob horses and carry swords to make a fortune. This youth who was proficient in spear techniques was one of them. He had the unique aura of a refugee. If Su Fengnian remembered correctly, this youth had a little sister who was as thin as a matchstick. It was because of her that Su Fengnian didn't kill them and even gave the siblings a bag of broken silver. Su Fengnian said, "Let him come over." The young man, who was hot-blooded and wanted to go forward, was already very scared when he met the white horse riders. He had always remembered the superb martial arts of the handsome ranger. He was grateful that the ranger did not kill him and gave him the silver. Now that the silver had been pierced by the young man, he put it on a rope and hung it around his sister's neck. His sister liked it very much. When the young man learned that this person was the prince who controlled the life and death of all the refugees, he did not think too much. He was afraid that he would never see him again, so he wanted to thank him personally. The young man was embarrassed and uneasy. His footsteps were a bit erratic. When he finally walked 5 or 6 steps away from the young prince, his mind was blank. He did not know what to say. His face was red, and he did not even know where to put his hands. Su Fengnian softly smiled and said, "What is your name? I remember that you have a younger sister who is braver than you." The young man finally came back to his senses. He swallowed his saliva and said in a trembling voice, replying to the prince, "This one is called Lu Su. My sister is called Lu Yu." Su Fengnian joked, "You even know how to report back?" The young man secretly pinched his waist, and his mind finally cleared up a little. He smiled shyly and said, "I learned it from the workers. When they talk to the city overseer, they all say the same thing." Chen Shiliang smiled and explained to Su Fengnian, "Lu Yu wanted to go to the border and join the army. I saw that he was too young, so I didn't agree. However, this youth is quite strong, so I allowed him to do some work for the yamen and earn some money to make ends meet. His hands and feet are nimble, and he is also smart. He can already recognize more than 100 words. Every day, when he is free, he will use a branch to write on the ground." In fact, this youth and his sister originally only had surnames and no names. They were just casual nicknames. Lu Yu and Lu Yu were actually given by him. Su Fengnian looked at the youth and asked with a smile, "You went to the border to join the army. If you die, what will happen to your sister? Why didn't you join the Lingzhou army? At least you don't have to fight on the battlefield." The youth replied with a serious face, "The official in charge of recording said that we get a lot of money from the border army and we get money quickly. As long as we go, not only will we get a large amount of money, we will also get a piece of land in Lingzhou. Then again, didn't they say that one of our Bailiang soldiers could fight 3 or 4 of their northern barbarians? I might not die if I go to the border. If I can use my spear to kill a few northern barbarians and become a sergeant or something, then my sister won't have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of her life. She might even have her dowry." The youth seemed to have remembered something and quickly said, "Reporting to your highness." Su Fengnian laughed loudly. After thinking about it, he said, "All right, I will allow you to join the army in Yuzhou. Your spear techniques are not bad. I have experienced it before. Once you learn how to ride a horse, I will have Huang Fu promote you to be a sergeant. I will help you and your sister find a good family in Lingzhou to live in." The youth bargained, "Your highness, my sister still has to be surnamed Lu, is that all right?" Su Fengnian nodded and then joked, "Why don't you change your surname to Su? How about it? I can promote you to a sergeant right now." The eyes of the Azure Sky Academy's Wei Chengcheng and his entourage turned green. What the F***ck? This was a huge meat pie that had fallen from the heavens. Although it wasn't as popular as it was during the spring and autumn period, to be bestowed a surname by an emperor or a vassal was still a great honor for these heroes. Great General Su Shao had been in the military for over 40 years, and the number of times he had been bestowed surnames could be counted on one hand. Spear Immortal junior brother Su Yanbing was one of them. However, he did not expect that the youth would be stunned for a moment before shaking his head and saying, "I haven't killed the northern barbarians yet. How can I be a sergeant? Also, if my parents knew that my sister and I changed our surnames, they would beat me to death in my dreams." Wei Chengcheng almost wanted to hang this brat up and beat him up. If your parents knew that you rejected the king of Bailiang's good intentions, they would really beat you to death in your dreams. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "That's fine. Anyway, after you go to Yuzhou, go find a general called Huang Fushi and tell him that I told you to join the army." The youth timidly asked, "Aren't we going to Liangzhou? I heard that the soldiers there get better pay and the land they get is better." Su Fengnian did not know whether to laugh or cry and said, "Liangzhou is about to start a war. Your spear techniques are not bad, but you haven't familiarized yourself with battle formations. No matter how good your skills are, you won't be able to fight against the northern barbarians' charge." The youth seemed to understand and made an "oh" sound. Those villagers who had heard that the king of Bailiang was coming personally returned. They watched with great interest as this extremely daring child spoke in front of the prince. They were somewhat envious. How much luck did this kid have in his previous life to be able to speak with the prince? How high was the prince's official position? In any case, they all knew that the entire Bailiang was his property. Of course, this prince was not old at all. After that, Su Fengnian and Chen Shiliang went to the graves 10 li south of Qingcang City. The cenotaphs of the white horse righteous Song who had died in battle were located in the oasis. Su Fengnian's disciple, Yu Dilong, and several of his retainers all carried a large bag of green ant wine. Su Fengnian and Chen Shiliang went to the graves one by one to offer wine. Chen Shiliang's expression was solemn. Every time he saw a cenotaph, he would tell Su Fengnian when and where the white horse righteous Song had died in the cenotaph. After the ceremony, Su Fengnian felt that something was missing. Suddenly, a rider came to report that 2 strangers had broken into this place. They said that they wanted to use water instead of wine to offer a sacrifice to the heroic spirit. Su Fengnian led his horse forward and saw Song Dongming, who had arrived half a day later than him in Qingcang City. This man, one of the hidden figures of Liyang, saw Su Fengnian's entourage, especially Wei Chengshi's bright armor. How could Song Dongming not guess this young man's background? He bowed slightly, raised his head and said with a smile, "The prince does not treat people with sincerity." Su Fengnian smiled and did not deny it. He said apologetically, "I hope Sir Song will forgive me." Song Dongming glanced at the young scholar beside Su Fengnian and withdrew his gaze. He said straightforwardly, "The prince does not seem to be a wise lord worthy of the people's loyalty." Without another word, Wei Chengshi pulled out his Beiliang sword and wanted to cut off the head of this bastard who spoke without thinking. Su Fengnian raised his hand and stopped the hot-tempered Qingcang commandant behind him. He asked with a smile, "What do you mean by that?" Song Dongming was not afraid at all. He calmly said, "There are more than 1,000 poems in the frontier fortress of Liyang. Among them, half of the line, 'Why should I die in battle?' is the best. In my opinion, this is just a line of nonsense that a scholar can talk without feeling any pain. Therefore, Song Dongming has a question for the king of Beiliang." Su Fengnian said calmly, "Please ask." Song Dongming looked around and sneered, "Dare I ask, in the attack and defense of Qingcang City, no less than 3,000 soldiers of Beiliang died. Why is it that only the white horse of the king of Beiliang has a cenotaph and occupies this oasis?" Su Fengnian was silent. Chen Shiliang's eyes suddenly lit up. Song Dongming continued with a mocking tone, "The butcher Su Shao has 10,000 snow dragon cavalry. The second son Su Longxiang has 30,000 Longxiang army. The protector of Beiliang, Chu Lushan, has a personal army. Yuan Zuozong and Yan Wenluan also have personal armies. These soldiers are naturally brave and unrivaled. They are also willing to fight for Beiliang. But then what? Beiliang invades the south with only 70 to 80,000 people. You can even say that with only 300,000 Beiliang soldiers, you can win? Or perhaps, king of Beiliang, you think that this is a situation of certain death. As long as you have the heart to die, you have a clear conscience of Beiliang?" Su Fengnian was still not angry. He asked back, "What does Mr. Song want to teach me?" Song Dongming asked, "Since Beiliang is destined to face the million cavalry of Beimang alone, let's not talk about victory or defeat. We must make sure that everyone dies a worthy death. Does the king of Beiliang agree?" Su Fengnian nodded. "Of course," Song Dongming said in a clear voice. "Then I ask the king of Beiliang to find a place within our borders to make it a hero's grave. Erect 300,000 tombstones." Song Dongming then stared at Su Fengnian. He squeezed out each word through gritted teeth. "One person dies. One name is recorded." Su Fengnian said, "Good, the back of Mount Qingliang can be used as a grave." Song Dongming asked again, "Among the 300,000, is there a tombstone for you, Su Fengnian?" Su Fengnian said without hesitation, "Yes, there is. First, write down the name Su Fengnian of Beiliang, just like all the other Beiliang soldiers. Now, just record the time and place of birth. After death, add the time and place of death." Song Dongming looked into Su Fengnian's eyes. After a long time, he bowed solemnly and said in a low voice, "Song Dongming is willing to be a subject of Beiliang. I am willing to give advice to the king of Beiliang." Su Fengnian smiled. "Good." When Song Dongming straightened his back and raised his head, Su Fengnian walked to the side of this dear Song disciple. The two stood side by side. Su Fengnian lowered his voice and said softly, "I know that deep down in your heart, you don't want to be an official, but so what?" Song Dongming also said softly, The king of Beiliang is wrong. To be an official in Beiliang is to be an official in the mortal world, not an official in the heavens. Su Fengnian was non-committal. Is it enough to be the temporary deputy commissioner of Beiliang's Taoist secretariat, overseeing Mount Qingliang? Song Dongming nodded. It's enough. In the autumn of the first year of Xiangfu, Song Dongming of the Deer Song clan became an official in Beiliang. Chapter 1188. They were not in a hurry to return to Qingcang City. Su Fengnian, Song Dongming, and Chen Shiliang sat by a stream. Su Fengnian did not hide anything from the newly appointed deputy administrator. He told him a lot of Beiliang's plans. For example, Wang Lingbao led the troops to the Phoenix Regiment to kill the capricious Malyoka in order to clear a path for Chao Wei's 10,000 light cavalry. It could even be said that the temporary expansion of the Longxiang army before the war was also to ambush these 10,000 cavalry. The main force of the Phoenix Regiment was a secret deal between Beiliang and the six-pearl Bodhisattva of Mount Lantua. After listening, Song Dongming did not talk about the details. Instead, he picked up some stones and placed them on the ground. He muttered to himself, "Currently, there are 3 battlefields. Chu Lushan is in charge of the main battlefront north of Liangzhou. The pass, military town, and Wubao Relay Road are all perfect. It is not an exaggeration to say that they are impregnable. To the north of Yuzhou, Beiliang has a natural advantage. It is easy to defend but difficult to attack. It is unlikely that Beiliang will attack Yuzhou in the early stages. However, Liuzhou is vast and has very few ups and downs. The terrain is like a flat plain, which is good for cavalry. We don't have any big cities or towns to rely on. Beiliang has the advantage in terms of overall military strength. They don't need to use schemes to mobilize their troops. If they choose this route to go south, they will bypass Yuliang and Liangzhou. The only thing they need to guard against is that their supply line will be cut off by the Su family's cavalry stationed in the northwest of Liangzhou. This will test the sneak attack and counterattack skills of both sides. Su Fengnian glanced at Chen Shiliang. The latter slowly said, "If Beiliang wants to successfully go south into Shu, regardless of whether Beiliang set up Liuzhou as a refugee land, they will try to open a gap here. Otherwise, even if they have 1,000,000 troops, they will not be able to afford to attack the defense line in the north of Yuliang. After all, our Beiliang army, whether cavalry or infantry, are very good at fighting. Moreover, the cavalry can defend the city if they dismount, but they can also take the initiative to attack if they mount. This is the real headache for Bei Mang. General has long built large granaries and arsenals in the most important cities and fortresses on the front lines to prepare for a long war." Chen Shiliang paused and smiled. "But in fact, our Beiliang army has never thought that only defending the city is the best strategy. This point has been passed down from General and Li Yishan to Yan Wenluan, Chu Lushan, Yuan Zuozong, and all the other young generals. They have all come to a clear consensus. Therefore, Beiliang has been practicing martial arts for many years and has always strived for both offense and defense. Bei Mang chose to start the war now because of the general's death. In addition, Beiliang has to send a portion of its forces to the plains of Liuzhou in order to absorb the refugees. First, Bei Mang's Western Front faction finally feels that there is an opportunity. Second, they can't afford to drag it out. If the Liang Imperial Court evolves the power of the Central Plains into fighting forces at the front lines, the power of the two countries will only grow stronger and weaker. Bei Mang will have even less of a chance to fight. It can be said that choosing Liuzhou as the location of the war is the entry point that Bei Mang thinks it can benefit from. It is also a very proactive choice by Beiliang. This is not because Beiliang is arrogant, but because they are confident. Especially confident that our cavalry will fight at their doorstep. Song Dongming smiled knowingly and nodded. Beiliang's military is actually like a well-cultivated field, waiting for the harvest. As the deputy administrator who has not yet received his official robe, I will not add feet to a snake. Compared to Beiliang, Bei Mang can be said to be a big family with a lot of resources. However, it is inevitable that there will be storms in a house with many branches. I heard that Empress Murong, in order to not have to worry about the future, wants to start a massacre of the Yelu family, the old masters of the grasslands. Many of the masters of the grasslands who are not willing to go down south to attack Beiliang have become lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Why don't we add oil to the fire and randomly choose one of the Yelu descendants to spread the news that Beiliang is willing to recognize him as the ruler of Bei Mang, and not the usurping Empress Murong? This kind of thing will definitely not be able to hurt Bei Meng, but it will be able to annoy them a little. In the end, it is a good thing. Song Dongming stopped here and smiled. Bei Liang most likely has a backup plan for this, right? Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. Song Dongming continued, as for the specific war plans, Song Dongming will not interrupt. Bei Liang is an expert in war, and they have many generals who are familiar with military matters. When professionals do things, I, as an outsider, will just watch the show. However, although Bei Meng's million-strong army seems aggressive, the ones who can really fight with their lives on the line are Dongzhu's nearly 100,000 soldiers, Hong Jingyan's Ruan cavalry, Yang Yuanzan, Lu Gui, and a few other veteran generals. However, most of them are not elite soldiers. When the time comes, under the premise that we do not affect the overall situation, we will be able to wipe out one of Bei Meng's mediocre but sufficient soldiers in one go. Bei Meng is not a monolithic entity to begin with. Otherwise, the masters of the grasslands in Baiting would not have withdrawn at this time. They have always disagreed on whether to attack Bei Liang on the western front or Gu Jiantang on the eastern front. If we cut them slowly, there might be a pleasant surprise. Of course, this is just a casual suggestion from Song Dongming. Su Fengnian, who had been silent this entire time, finally spoke. This has always been a small link in Chu Lushan's interconnected plans. Song Dongming happily laughed. Just a small link. Haha, I finally know why everyone is so afraid of that infamous Lu Choer. It's no wonder that the great king of the southern courtyard, Dong Zhuo, suffered a great loss at the hands of our protector general. Song Dongming narrowed his eyes and threw a stone into the stream, causing a ripple. On the imperial court side, there are some things that I can do. Regarding the grain, salt, and iron, I have a plan that can make the imperial court completely relent. Su Fengnian smiled. The imperial court has always wanted to make oxen pull carriages while not letting oxen eat grass. They're extremely stingy. Even now, the half of the grain that they've relented with great difficulty still hasn't been shipped to Beiliang's Lingzhou docks. If West Chu hadn't given them a warning at the start of the restoration of the country, this batch of grain probably wouldn't have left Xianxia city for 100 years. Song Dongming said calmly. It's very simple. We of Beiliang sent a letter to the capital and asked to send 10,000 soldiers to quell the problem. The kings of the border have the responsibility to guard the border and also quell the problem for the country. It's perfectly justifiable. The imperial court has suffered 2 major defeats in a row. Yang Xinxing's Jinan infantry have been caught like turtles in a jar. Yan Zhenchuan has sacrificed his life for the country, and all his soldiers have died in battle. Isn't this telling the imperial court that West Chu is difficult to deal with? We of Beiliang have always been good at gnawing at hard bones. The other kings of Beiliang can't do anything. If 10,000 isn't enough, how about 30,000? Chen Shiliang smiled slightly. It looks like the Ministry of War of Great Peace City is going to be a mess. Earlier, it was Su Fengnian who had asked Song Dongming if a secondary second-rank official's hat was enough. Now, Song Dongming's mocking "is it enough?" was really returning the favor. Su Fengnian smiled. The imperial court will hate you to death. I have to let experts protect you, the deputy administrator. Otherwise, Zhao Gou's death soldiers will definitely come to take your head. Song Dongming did not smile at all. His eyes were firm as he said softly, if the Zhao family doesn't even have this much courage, how can they rule the world? Do they really think that Beiliang will exchange the death of 300,000 soldiers for their peace? It's true that all the land under the heavens belongs to the king. But since Beiliang is also the Liang territory, are the millions of Beiliang not citizens of the Zhao family? There's no such absurd logic in the world. Chen Shiliang sighed. He was convinced by this. For some reason, compared to Su Beiji who betrayed Bei Meng, Chen Shiliang felt closer to Song Dongming. Chapter 1189. At this moment, a person fell into the stream. On the shore, Yu Dilong shook his wrist, his face full of disdain. Seeing his master turn his head, Yu Dilong explained loudly, "Master, don't blame me. This kid asked me to hit him. He just said that he could knock me down with one finger even if he stood still. He also said that there were only a few masters in Beiliang. He said that he was a third-level master and that he hadn't met a single master since he came to Beiliang." Yu Dilong glanced at the drenched chicken in the stream and said disdainfully, "What third-level master? He made me use half of my strength to throw that punch." If I had known that he was so weak, I would have been merciful. Wei Cheng secretly gave the child a thumbs up. Yu Dilong responded with a silly smile. Song Dongming ignored the aggrieved and shocked page boy and asked with a smile. Your Highness, I heard that you took in 3 disciples. Which one is it? Su Fengnian said somewhat helplessly, the youngest one is the eldest disciple. He's the most worrisome. That's why I brought him with me. Otherwise, in the future, Jianghu will have another big devil who does things without scruples. A rider from the Longxiang army galloped over. After dismounting, he said, reporting to Your Highness, General Su and his 90 men have arrived at the Killing Dragon Hill 10 miles away. Su Fengnian stood up and said with a smile, Chen Shiliang, you accompany Mr. Song back to Qingcang City first. I'll go see my brother. Chen Shiliang asked, what about these white horse righteous followers? Su Fengnian said with a smile, do you think it's the 2 of you who need protection, or me? Chen Shiliang smiled slightly and said no more. One of the white horse righteous followers hesitated for a moment, then gathered his courage and said, Your Highness. Su Fengnian was somewhat puzzled, but he calmly said, if you have something to say, just say it. The white horse took a deep breath. There was still a childishness on his young face that had not been completely blown away by the wind and sand of the frontier fortress. He lowered his eyes slightly and said softly, Qi Huayan is the one who died in the children's alley in Qingcang City. At that time, I was seriously injured and was sitting against the wall waiting for death. It was he who blocked a dozen machetes from the horse gang for me. He didn't leave any words before he died. But I feel that I should help him tell the prince that he, Qi Huayan, does not regret joining the White Horse Militia. His eyes were clear as he smiled and asked, Your Highness, when will the war begin? I want to join the vanguard battalion. Su Fengnian retorted, Qi Huayan died in battle. If you, Ding Xian, also died, how many people would remember him? The white horse righteous follower whose name was called bit his lips and smiled brightly. In the future, I will be buried with many generals at the back of Mount Qingliang. I'm not afraid that people will forget. Ding Xian scratched his head and said, I'm not afraid to be laughed at by the prince. Because of Qi Huayan, I was saved from the pile of corpses in Qingcang City. Even now, I'm still very afraid of death. It's just that Ding Xian's whole family followed the general to Beiliang and has already treated this place as their home. My grandfather said that even if he were to die, he would die in Beiliang. This is the root of our Ding family. My eldest brother is also an official, and my younger brothers are all studying. I only need to go to the border and kill northern barbarians. If I kill one, it'll be a profit. Su Fengnian smiled and said, It's not your turn to fight for a position in the vanguard battalion. Just be a white horse righteous follower. When the time comes that you really need to go to battle, not to mention other things, our graves can still be neighbors. Ding Xian opened his mouth wide, not knowing what to say. The next moment, the young vassal lord's figure flashed and disappeared. Everyone only felt a cool breeze on their faces. Even the page boy who just walked out of the stream widened his eyes. No wonder he was the most powerful person in the world who made the old monster Wang of the martial emperor city unable to return. Song Dongming suddenly remembered something. When they met earlier, the king of Beiliang changed his name to Su Qi. The word strange. It was not a good word to use in a name. People with strange fate were always described in history books as those who died young and never reached the top. For example, Yi Baikue of the spring and autumn period. Not only did he not help Chu to conquer the world, but he also died for his country. Another example was Luo Gongming, who was recognized as the most powerful person in the Dafeng dynasty 400 years ago but did not become a general until his death. He was also said to have a strange fate. Chen Shiliang said softly, 300,000 tablets. I'm afraid it will stretch for dozens of miles from the back mountain of the prince's mansion. It's a huge project, and the war is imminent. Mr. Song, won't we be suspected of running our legs while the civil officials only move their mouths? Song Dongming said calmly, Don't worry, we won't need to use any of the prince's mansion's money, and it won't affect the soldiers' pay at the border. There will be countless families whose children are fighting at the border who will contribute money and effort. If anyone dares to escape, I, as the newly appointed deputy administrator, will burn the first fire on their heads. I want them to know that this war is not just the Su family's matter, but the entire Beiliang's matter. Chen Shiliang moved his lips. Song Dongming looked at the young scholar who was reserved and smiled softly. Xiaoyang, do you think I'm being unreasonable? Chen Xiaoyang shook his head. Song Dongming sighed. If we don't do this, we won't be able to defend Beiliang. In the end, the people will be the ones suffering. How can the suffering of one tablet be compared to the destruction of the family in the future? Huang Longsher is full of nonsense, but there is one sentence that is thought-provoking. Chen Xiaoyang asked, is it about establishing a heart for heaven and earth, establishing a life for the people, inheriting the lost knowledge for the past saints, and establishing peace for all ages? Song Dongming smiled and shook his head. Chen Xiaoyang continued to ask, an ordinary man's will cannot be taken away? Song Dongming still shook his head and said softly, since ancient times, kings have been the most foolish, but the people have the most clear conscience. Chen Xiaoyang was in high spirits and nodded, I've learned something. The Killing Wyrm mound was a small, slightly towering hill. According to history, Luo Gongming, the general of the Great Feng dynasty, once shot a dragon here. At the bottom of the hill, more than 90 cavalrymen got off their horses to rest. Everyone was wearing armor that couldn't hide the bright red marks. They were originally the pitch-black armor of the Longxiang army, soaked in the blood of the horse gang who didn't have time to wipe it off. Su Longxiang, who was now respectfully called Little Prince by the Beiliang people, stood alone at the top of the hill, looking to the north. Ever since he led the Dragon Elephant Cavalry and crushed the 3 military towns of the Gentleman's Hall, Beiliang people said that the general's second son had been enlightened and that he had been possessed by a deity since he was a child. That was why he was born with the strength of a dragon and elephant. Even when Su Fengnian, who was still His Royal Highness, was the general of Lingzhou, a clamor arose. Everyone said that only when Su Longxiang was the king of Beiliang could Beiliang be stable. This time, Su Longxiang led the troops into Liuzhou. First, he killed the 10,000 horse gang hiding Beimang elites. Then, he called the 90 or so officers under his command to his side. He didn't say anything, just led them 1 man, 2 horses, 1 saber and 1 crossbow to kill people everywhere. They fought more than 20 battles, big and small, and killed more than 1,400 enemies. They didn't lose a single person on their side. These commandants with real power were so impressed that they prostrated themselves on the ground and worshipped this much younger commander-in-chief like a god. Unfortunately, during this hunting trip, they didn't see the little prince's black tiger, nor did they see the little prince's bright red talisman armor. Moreover, Su Longxiang was taciturn with everyone. Until now, no one had the opportunity to say anything extra. Su Longxiang stood on the Killing Flood Dragon Hill, his back to his subordinates. No one below the hill knew what this young commander was thinking. Suddenly, almost everyone raised their heads at the same time, seeing a figure rush up the hill without any warning. Everyone subconsciously wanted to draw their sabers, but when they saw the person's face, they felt relieved. It was the king of Beiliang. That was their commander's older brother. Su Fengnian arrived at Su Longxiang's side, one hand gently pressing down on the youth's head. The 2 brothers looked toward the north together. Chapter 1190. The streets of Greaton City were empty. The emperor of the Zhao family and Empress Zhao Ji waited outside the city. They brought all the yellow doors of the Hanlin Academy just to wait for one person. The chief officials of the 6 ministries had all taken the initiative to slack off and gathered outside the city. Even the Minister of War, Liu Baijia, had pulled himself out of his busy schedule, not to mention the Minister of Appointments, Yuan Gua, who was an idle person. The head of the 6 ministries, Zhao Yuling of the Ministry of Appointments, and Wang Xiongui of the Ministry of Revenue, who had come from the same school but had parted ways with him, each had a large group of subordinate officials behind them. There were also Yan Jieshi, a relative of the imperial family, many of the grand secretaries of the palace, and many of the elders and nobles who did not need to participate in court meetings when they were old, and their descendants. It could be said that only the Prime Minister Yin Mao Chun, who was responsible for the local officials outside the capital, was missing. However, only those who were attentive would discover that this unprecedentedly grand open-air banquet was lacking in 2 important figures. The Grand Secretary, Zhang Julu, and the Tantanon, Huan Wen, who held the power of the province. However, there were too many high-ranking officials, nobles, and peddlers gathered outside Greaton City. The absence of these 2 important officials did not affect the extraordinary clamor of the capital today. When the Song family's first teacher and first teacher were the rulers of the literary world, who was it that made the father and son be refused the door when they visited on a snowy night? Who was it that the proud teacher of Su Weisheng had quarreled with and lost the position of Great Chancellor of the Shangyin Academy? Who was it that had the right to make the Confucian family led by Yao Baifeng use the power of their entire family to fight against him? Who was it that made the emperor of Dechu think, if the public does not come out of the mountains, what will they do for the common people? At the end of the spring and autumn period, who was it that walked out alone in the face of the pressure of the Su family's 10,000 cavalry, and made the butcher take a detour with just a few words? This was the important figure who was recognized by the entire court as the most knowledgeable person in the world. He was the current Grand Chancellor of Shangyin Academy, Qi Yanglong. 50 miles away from Great Peace City, there was a group of strange travelers on a slightly remote official road. The oldest one had a head of sparse white hair. He was short and travel-worn, and carried an old bamboo bookcase. A man in his 30s was carrying a green-robed girl on his back. The three of them met on their way north to Great Peace City. That old man who was still learning from the young people was embarrassed and refused to leave, so he stayed with them to eat and drink. The little girl in green did not like this disrespectful old man. He was crazy and always liked to say things that she did not understand. If this was not showing off his knowledge, then what was it? Especially when the old man talked about Bail Yang, he was particularly long-winded. Green-robed girl hated the vassal king who made her unable to see her second grandfather. She was even more unwilling to pay attention to the old man whom she had given the nickname, Short Winter Melon. Moreover, the old man liked to be unable to move his eyes away from beautiful women. The little girl complained to her Xiaoyu several times, but he always smiled and did not agree. At this time, on the official road, there was a group of children of aristocratic families galloping by. The old man's gaze finally moved away from the body of a rich girl riding a horse, and he began to mutter again. "Hey, hi, the girls today are becoming more and more beautiful. Compared to the previous 50 or 60 years, they are much more beautiful." After leaving Martial Emperor City, Groom Yu, who was traveling north, laughed softly and asked, "Old sir, is there such a thing?" The old man carefully stroked his withering snow-white hair. He felt sorry for his old brothers who had fallen off their heads along the way. He narrowed his eyes and sighed. "Yes, the world is good, so women can be good. The older I am, the more I envy you young people. Young man, when you are older, you will feel the same." The eldest disciple of Wang Xianji, who had been called young man, laughed it off. Groom Yu was not someone who liked to exchange pleasantries with others, so he did not speak. When the old man opened his mouth to speak, he was like a flood that could not be stopped at all. He said to himself, "The world flows like water, but after the spring and autumn war, there was a great turning point and the flow changed. In the future, it will only get better and better. What is the reason? I can't explain it for 3 days and 3 nights. But I just know it." Lying lazily on Groom Yu's back, Green Robe twisted her mouth and said, "Even if you like to say it, do you think I like to hear it?" The old man smiled and said, "Little girl, do you know what it means to like someone?" Green Robe turned her head, and decided not to look at this worrisome old man. The old man answered his own question. "That is, before you see the other person, you do not know what they are. After you miss them, you do not know what they are." Groom Yu, whose cultivation was deep and bottomless, seemed to be touched and frowned. The old man jumped up and down, probably hoping to see the walls of Great Peace City. Carrying the heavy box on his back, he made this comical movement. Green Robe Heir, who was secretly peeking at him, laughed. The old man made a face at the little girl, causing Green Robe Heir to roll her eyes. She put her little head on Groom Yu's warm shoulder and asked, "Grandpa Shortmelon, then do you have someone you like?" The old man shook his head and said with a smile, "No. When I was young, there were many women who liked me." Green Robe Heir used her finger to scratch her face, mocking this old man for being shameless. Groom Yu walked to the intersection of the official road and said with a smile, "Old sir, we still have to continue north. I hope we can meet again one day." The old man waved his hand and said with a carefree smile, "After today, it will be difficult to meet again. I am an old man who has been buried up to my neck. Little girl Green Robe Heir, I don't know your name. You have to grow up to be slender and elegant." Green Robe Heir made a sound of acknowledgement. Groom Yu carried the little girl and continued to walk towards Tu Liao while the old man walked towards Great Peace City. He had lived for too many years and hid too many words. The old man could not find anyone to talk to and could only talk to himself for many years. "Old Hong, you took in a basket of disciples and students, but only Jianghu and Huan came out of it. It seems you didn't catch many big fish even when you cast your net. Look at me, Sun Ping, Xiefeiyu, Yuan Benshi. Just these three nameless students. Old Hong, don't blame me for bullying the weak on this trip to Jing. But if you have the ability to climb out of your coffin and scold me, then you have the ability. As he walked, the old man could finally raise his head and see the grand outline of Great Peace City. The old man shook his box and started to hum a song. I came from the mountains, carrying an old box. I am going to the busy city, where is my home? Chapter 1191. Tantanon carried a jug of fine wine as he walked down the deserted street. On both sides of the street were the most prestigious mansions in the capital. However, at this time, they were all outside the city to welcome the old man who was even older than himself. Every door was tightly shut, which saved him a lot of time for this visit. He stopped outside a mansion and raised his head to look at the golden inscribed board written by the emperor. The plainly dressed prime minister gatekeeper saw this unexpected guest and was somewhat stunned. However, before this year, Tantanon came and went simply, so he didn't make a big fuss. If the time came, he would be caught by the left servant Shi. He could only respectfully go forward and greet him. Huanwen smiled and nodded. He casually said a few words. Old Ma, is your youngest daughter married or not? If she isn't, do you want me to help you kidnap a young man? This made the old gatekeeper, surnamed Ma, very happy. Huanwen was even more familiar with this mansion than his own. He didn't need anyone to lead the way. He walked straight to the Grand Secretary's study and didn't knock on the door. He stepped over the threshold. Zhang Julu, who was habitually standing and reading a book, glanced at him out of the corner of his eye and didn't say anything. Huanwen placed the jug of fine wine he had stolen from the Ministry of Rites on the table. He sat on the only chair in the room and said, "It really is the noise of cicadas that surpasses the silence of the forest." The two old men were best friends. In Tantanon's words, "When you raise your butt, I know what shit you're about to shit." Zhang Julu quickly understood and said calmly, "This is not the noise of cicadas. Qi Yonglong entered the capital on the great path of the sun. It is more like a dragon entering the sea." Huanwen gave a cold snort and casually picked up a few documents on the table. His heart immediately sank. You really want to make a big move on the water transport that the northern nobles single-handedly control and the salt policy that the new nobles in the capital see as their lifeblood? In addition, a few days ago, you proposed in court that the left and right assistant ministers of the Ministry of War patrol the border on a regular basis. Well, the two main camps of scholars in the court, the local generals headed by Gu Jiantang, and your removal of the feudal vassals. These four huge monsters, not one is left out. Do you think you have too few enemies? Zhang Julu didn't raise his head. You count as one less. I still have to deal with the abuses of the officials. After the world's poor soldiers advance, it can't be done once and for all. Rules still have to be followed. Huanwen muttered, "Crazy, crazy." Zhang Julu put away the book in his hand and meticulously placed it back in its original position on the bookcase. The tall Grand Secretary of the current dynasty stood in the shadows and slowly said, "Our Liang is not the Dechu that once controlled the left side of the Yangtze River. Regardless of when the remnants of West Chu will be extinguished, the imperial court will continuously transport grain and supplies from the rich and populous lands in the southeast to the capital. This is a national plan that requires 100 years of operation. Furthermore, the war at the border is imminent and has become an urgent matter. Back then, when I proposed the matter of transporting grain by sea, reality proved that it was not feasible. The risk was too great. Even now, we still don't know whether the disappearance of the fleet in the last year of Yonghui was due to a disaster at sea or if they were kidnapped. This canal has the malicious saying of scraping off all the richness of the southeast, but it also shows its importance to the imperial court. Back then, the plan I set was indeed to use the southeast's taxes to support the northern Liao soldiers and at the same time to force West Chu to rebel. Even so, along the canal every year, the common people stirred up riots over the river water. Therefore, I deliberately did not suppress it. However, in the past few years, the northern nobles who came from the land where the dragon rose to power held the lifeline of the country in their hands and profited without realizing it. They became more and more rampant in their actions. In the 6th year of Yonghui, there were still 9 million dan of grain entering the capital. Where did it go? Even if the grassland bandits were allowed to swagger away with the grain, how much could they take away? In order to appease the so-called founding heroes, The imperial court did not hesitate to set up a second-rank official post for the transport of grain. The 8 chief officials under them, including the grain transport company and the distribution company, were all 5th rank and above officials. If they could peacefully distribute the money, then it would be fine. However, now that West Chu had reclaimed the country, they actually dared to use the so-called ancestral system to forcefully reject the order of the Minister of War, Liu Baijie, to deploy troops. If I don't touch the administration of the transport of grain, who will? When the time comes, will the northern soldiers have to go to war with the Bei Mang on an empty stomach? Will the soldiers who are going to die for the country eat grain to fill their stomachs and still have to look at other people's faces? Or even beg the transport officials who don't care about the Ministry of Revenue? Huanwen sighed and shook the memorial in his hand. Then this salt administration? Who doesn't earn money? It was originally a fat piece of meat that was eaten by outsiders from the imperial court. Do you have to go to the tiger's den to pull teeth? Zhang Julu laughed coldly. Stagnant water stinks. Living water is clear. The right to issue the salt seal has been in their hands for more than a decade and earned more money than their descendants can spend in 10 lifetimes. Is the imperial court's reward not generous enough? Great military service should be rewarded to the end. It's time to change the banker and make a lot of money. Huanwen asked. You plan to give it to the Jiangnan aristocratic families who boast of their clean sleeves and carry the bright moon on their shoulders. Zhang Julu said with a nod. If they don't do this, how could they wholeheartedly work for the court? Otherwise, even if the court fought with West Chu for several dozen years, they would still be able to leisurely enjoy their several dozen years of romance. The rich families have always been like this. There are only 2 things that can make them lower their heads: an official's hat and a money bag. Huanwen wanted to say something but hesitated. If it were in the past, he could pick out any matter and discuss it day and night with Bai Yan until they confirmed that there was no great harm to the people's livelihood. Then, they worked together to implement national policies, like slowly unblocking the meridians of the entire empire. Zhang Julu walked out of the shadows. In the twilight, the dim yellow afterglow shone on one side of the tall old man's face. Huanwen sighed. Zhang Julu asked, I heard that you had a bad cough a while ago? Huanwen glared at him and said, Who do you think will die faster between a minor illness and a person who doesn't know how to control himself? Zhang Julu dismissed it with a laugh. Huanwen hesitated and was about to speak when Zhang Julu smiled and said, That young man from Beiliang who is under your tutelage, I will give him an evaluation of too much ingenuity but not enough power, can be used, but can't be put to great use. That will guarantee him a few years of stability. Huanwen looked deeply at his old friend and then silently walked out of the study. Zhang Julu opened his mouth but did not speak in the end. He only looked at Huanwen's old figure and gently waved his hand. After Tan Tonwing left the Zhang mansion, where even now there were people who dared to throw letters at the door insulting the Grand Secretary Darren, he went straight to the Zhao family's Wang, to the Hanlin Academy where no one was on duty. Other than the odd job workers and petty officials, there was no one else. The old man smiled bitterly. Great Peace City thought that as long as that old dragon came out to save the people, what deer was there to be needed? Huanwen walked to a secluded room and had someone bring a key to open it. While there had not been any big or small yellow doors working here for many years, there were often people cleaning and it could be considered elegant and clean. In the past, he and Bai Yan had been in this room. He, Huanwen, had been high-spirited and looked down on everyone. After drinking, he dared to scold anyone. Was there anything in the world that he, Huanwen, could not teach? Bai Yan never drank and only listened. Every time Huanwen got drunk, she would have to carry him home. Huanwen rummaged through a book box in the corner, found a pair of chopsticks and placed them on the table. After Huanwen sat down, he used a chopstick to lightly tap against the porcelain cup. Ding ding ding. The old man choked and said, The Spring Mountain is not old, it is still green. When one is old, there is no one to accompany them, only listening to ding ding ding. Ding ding ding. Chapter 1192. Not only were the 2 brothers of Beiliang, Su Fengyan and Su Longxiang present, there was also a deputy administrator that had never been set up before in the Liang dynasty. In the twilight, before the city was closed, there was a mighty group of horses entering Qingcang. The guards were actually from the Wei River camp. In Beiliang, only the relatives of the emperor, who were related to the Su family by marriage, would have this kind of special treatment. If it wasn't the Lu family in Qingzhou, then it would be the Lin family that produced the god of wealth. As expected, Lu Zhan, who was in charge of welcoming the guests, saw the tall figure of Wang Linquan. He was travel-worn. Originally, Lu Zhan was a bit nervous. After all, Wang Linquan was a pawn who carried the flag for the great general. He was a trusted aide among trusted aides. Now that he had become the new King Liang's father-in-law, he was an influential person of 2 dynasties. As a scholar, he didn't dare to put on airs in front of such a popular person. However, Wang Linquan was very easy to talk to. Although he didn't deliberately speak warmly, his eyes were sincere. This made Lu Zhan feel a bit better. Lu Zhan had heard before that the 2 people from Beiliang who were also from Qingzhou, the Lu family led by the great scholar Lu Dongjiang, was very hard to please. Wang Linquan, who was the richest man in Qingzhou, was very considerate. There had never been any rumors that the Lin family bullied others. Now that he saw it with his own eyes, Lu Zhan believed most of it. Lu Zhan led Wang Linquan to a quiet courtyard in the north of the old Dragon King's residence. There were no strict guards along the way. Wang Linquan, who had sharp eyes, felt a bit of a knot in his heart. He felt that the provincial governor Yang Guangdou was too careless. However, he quickly felt relieved. In today's world, how many masters dared to show off their martial arts in front of the king of Beiliang? However, after Wang Linquan and Lu Zhan crossed the courtyard door, they saw the scene in front of them. They looked at each other in dismay. They saw the young king sitting on the stairs with his sleeves rolled up and washing his brother Su Longxiang's hair. The young commander of the Dragon Elephant Cavalry was squatting 2 steps down. He raised his butt and lowered his head towards the water basin. Lu Zhan didn't dare to stay any longer and hurriedly took her leave. Su Fengnian held Su Longxiang's hair with one hand and used the other hand to apply local soap on his brother's hair. When he saw his father-in-law, he could only raise his elbow and gesture for Wang Linquan to sit beside him. Su Longxiang turned his head and grinned. This could be considered a greeting. Wang Linquan couldn't help but feel flattered. In Beiliang, the young prince didn't warm up to anyone. Even when he was with his second sister Su Weisheng, he rarely smiled. As Su Fengnian washed Su Longxiang's hair, he said casually, "I can only rest assured when I leave all the big and small businesses in Liuzhou to Uncle Wang. There will definitely be a lot of gossip. Some people will say that I appoint people by favoritism, that I only care about the Su family's money and ignore Beiliang's great achievements. Otherwise, even if I don't avoid family, why would I only use the Wang family and ignore the talented Lu family? Others may not be able to see the twists and turns in this matter, but your Uncle Wang must be well aware. Ever since the death of Lu Feiqi of the Pillar State, Lu Feiqi of the Lu family, Lu Dongjiang is temporarily unable to support the Lu family. Our master Lu, after his death, first sought an official position for the Lu family's children. After being rejected by his daughter, Lu Chengyan, he has now begun to compete with others for the position of the leader of Beiliang's literary scene. He hasn't been idle for a moment. I can't say anything and can only let him do as he pleases. As long as he doesn't cross the line, there will always be a place for the Lu family at the New Year's Eve dinner on Mount Qingliang." Wang Linquan sighed and didn't say anything else. Although the Su family and the Lu family were grasshoppers on the same rope, sharing honor and disgrace, it was difficult for an honest official to resolve family disputes. The Lu family didn't look far ahead, and Wang Linquan couldn't run to Lu family and criticize them in front of Lu Dongjiang. Moreover, the entire Lu family was filled with scholars, each more arrogant than the other. They would never take a merchant like him seriously. Because of their daughters, the Lu family and the Wang family were on equal footing in Beiliang. The Wang family didn't think much of it, but the Lu family, which had been officials for generations, was something they felt ashamed of. Su Fengnian helped his younger brother dry his hair. He raised his head to look at the uneasy Wang Linquan and asked with a smile, "What's wrong, Uncle Wang? Don't you recognize me?" Wang Linquan smiled bitterly and said softly, "Wang Yi, my daughter Chudong has never understood the ways of the world. Now, she has run to the academy to cause trouble. It is really improper. Wang Yi, when it is time to scold and hit her, please don't be lenient." Su Fengnian joked, "I can't bear to do that. I don't know how other people get married, but the Su family has never had a rule of hiding a woman at home. Uncle Wang, you have seen my mother. Does Su Xiao dare?" Wang Linquan laughed brightly and said, "Wang Yi is joking. Wang Fei is a rare woman in the world. My daughter doesn't dare to be mentioned in the same breath as Wang Fei. The general respects Wang Fei, and that is because Wang Fei deserves it." Su Fengnian raised his sleeve to carelessly wipe his face and asked, Uncle Wang, do you want to talk about Su Zhao's past? When he talks with me and Huang Man, he always likes to talk about his heroic deeds. Every time I ask about those famous defeats, he always avoids talking about them. Chapter 1193. Wang Linquan nodded and was lost in thought for a moment. He was probably reminiscing about the past. Once he was immersed in it, he couldn't extricate himself. Most old people were like this. Reminiscing about the past was like flipping open a yellowed old book and reading old stories. Wang Linquan sat on the steps and looked at the empty courtyard. He began to talk about the bloody battles that almost caused the Su family's army to fall and never get back up again. The opponents that made Su Xiao suffer in the battlefield were no longer of interest, and most of the official history books were not written about. Among them, there were 2 generals from the old Liang dynasty who joined forces to set a trap for Su Xiao. Wang Linquan said that it was a close-quarters battle in the rain. Su Xiao was only a military officer at the time. He led 600 elite soldiers into the city. In the end, he was faced with 3,000 foot soldiers. In the end, only 46 people, including Su Xiao, managed to escape from the city. This was nothing. The 2 generals took the heads of the Su family soldiers as rebels and reported it to the imperial court to receive military merit. The imperial court allowed it. Su Xiao led his private army to flatten the 2 vassal towns that nominally submitted to the Zhao family. When Su Xiao was at his poorest, he was no different from a vagrant bandit. The imperial court didn't pay him, so the local officials saw him as an enemy and could only rob. However, they did their best not to hurt people. After taking their belongings, they would secretly record their names. After Su Zhao's meteoric rise, the families whose belongings and provisions were robbed by the Su family soldiers all received a generous reward. Among them was the Qishui commandery's Lu family, which almost made it into the legend of the seductive minister. Back then, Su Xiao only robbed them of 200 taels worth of goods. To the Lu family, it didn't matter. If Su Xiao hadn't spoken, the Lu family would have been annihilated if they made it into the legend of the seductive minister. As Wang Linquan spoke, his eyes turned red. He smiled and said, I remember when we decided to attack West Chu, there were many people in the army who disagreed with the imperial court's arrangement of troops. They all felt that if we were to attack West Chu, which was led by Yi Baikue, there was no way we could fight this battle. Our Su family army had fought for so many years. There was no reason for us to be at the forefront and die. At that time, there were a few old generals who had already been conferred titles who were the fiercest. At that time, people's hearts were wavering and the army's morale was unstable. Su Xiao talked to them once. At that time, I was the general's personal guard and was guarding the camp. I remember it very clearly. The argument was very fierce. In any case, after that, most of these generals returned to Great Peace City. There weren't many left. Afterwards, Commander Chu, Commander Yuan, Yan Wenluan, and Wei Taizhan, who were still young and strong at the time, all received orders and became generals. It wasn't just the imperial court that didn't think highly of us. In reality, our own people didn't have much confidence either. Fortunately, Commander Chu and Commander Yuan took the lead in a few tough battles and won unbelievable victories. Over the years, Wang Linquan had seen a few old men who had left the Su family army in the vicinity of Jianghu. In addition, there were many old soldiers of the Su family who had to leave the army because of injuries. I discovered something very interesting. Those who didn't contribute much but clearly received benefits didn't know how to be grateful. They liked to often speak ill of Bailiang in a strange manner. On the other hand, those old soldiers who had contributed much but remained nameless didn't ask for anything in return. After so many years, they had always spoken well of the general. Back then, their words carried little weight. No one was willing to listen to their long-winded chatter. Su Fengnian nodded. Right now, Bailiang's situation is similar. In truth, the reasoning isn't that complicated. Many people are essentially businessmen. Whatever they do, they pay attention to self-interest. Making friends, becoming officials, marrying their descendants, singing poems, and so on, they all have a ledger in their hearts that they clearly remember. However, these kinds of people are still in the minority. Su Fengnian smiled and said indifferently, because they have never contributed, they don't care. Wang Linquan sighed. I'm relieved that your highness thinks this way. After Su Fengnian helped Su Longxiang wash his hair and tie it up, he stood up and poured out the basin of water. Wang Linquan, the god of wealth, still had a pile of affairs on hand that he needed to decide, so he couldn't stay here any longer. Su Fengnian watched the old man's back as he left the courtyard. He thought to himself that it was time to pick an auspicious day to marry and take in a concubine. Otherwise, if this dragged on, the Wang and Lu families, who were still minding their own business, might end up quarreling with each other. In the end he, the son-in-law, would still be in trouble. Wang Linquan was kind and benevolent, but it didn't mean that the entire Wang family behind him was simple and honest. Although the Lu family seemed to have caused a lot of trouble in Mount Qingliang, Beiliang had no choice but to rely on this in-law to deal with the scholars in the territory in the future. Su Fengnian stood at the top of the stairs with a wooden basin in his hands. He laughed at himself. They are all businessmen who haggle over every ounce. Su Longxiang stood beside his brother. The young man's mouth already had some stubble. He was still skinny, but he was also much taller. Su Fengnian was just about to talk to Huang Manor about the words that had been accumulated in his heart for many years when the blue and white falcon in the sky dashed down, bringing with it a concise secret letter. There were 2 pieces of news in the letter. Close to 100 Qi refinement warriors from the Guanyin sect of the South Sea had entered Lingzhou. 100 Wu family sword tomb cavalry suddenly appeared in the pugilistic world and headed straight for Beiliang. Chapter 1194. In the northwest frontier fortress, yellow sand stretched for thousands of miles and withered grass was everywhere. As far as the eye could see, it was a vast yellow. The group of men and women in white who were as graceful as white butterflies were particularly eye-catching. They entered Liangzhou along the border of Lingzhou and continued to draw an arc. They leisurely came to Beiliang's 4th province, Liuzhou. Not long after they crossed the border, there was a group of cavalry waiting for them. Nominally, they were escorting this group of immortals from the isolated island in the South Sea to Qingcang City. But in fact, they were monitoring. Lord Tantai Pingjing did not care about this, but some of the Qi cultivators in the sect were resentful. They felt that their good intentions were treated as ill intent, and that the young vassal king was too unappreciative. However, the reason why the lord did not need to pacify them was because the 600 cavalrymen in light armor were too valiant. Their leader was the famous deputy general of the Longxiang army, Li Mofen. He was a devil in the Beiliang army who killed people like flies. His horse fighting ability was recognized as second only to the commander of the cavalry, Yuan Zuozong. In the wind and sand, Li Mofen rode in the front. In addition to the standard spear, knife, and crossbow of the Beiliang cavalry, there were 2 halberd pouches on both sides of the horse, containing no less than 20 short halberds. In addition, there were 2 long swords hanging on his left and right waist. At first glance, it was simply like an armory on horseback. Of course, Li Mofen was not an embroidered pillow. He was one of the top 3 archers in the Beiliang army. His swordsmanship, knife skills, and spear skills were all perfect. Su Shao relied on this person very much. He once joked that when Li Mofen married a woman, he would make him the deputy commander, and he could choose any cavalry or infantry army he wanted. The reason why he said this was because Li Mofen had a strange hobby that was not presentable. He was fond of men. The personal guards outside the tent had always been young and handsome soldiers. Su Shao had always turned a blind eye to this. It was really because Li Mofen was too brave and good at fighting. If he was placed in any army in Liang, he would be a pillar of strength who could bear the heavy responsibility of being the leader. When the water was too clear, there would be no fish. The northern Liang army had paid a lot of hidden costs to be able to fight well. For example, they ostracized strategists from the aristocratic families. Chu Lushan, Li Mofen, and the like had pushed many people out of the northern Liang army. The dragon elephant cavalry led by Li Mofen did not communicate with the Qi cultivators of the Guanyin sect. Both sides moved forward in silence, like a black and white snake slithering across a yellow satin surface. When they were approaching Qingcang City, the leader Li Mofen saw a person in the distance. He suddenly stopped his horse and twitched the corner of his mouth, revealing a gloating expression. He lightly glanced at the immortal masters in white not far away. This fierce general of the Beiliang raised his hand gently. The entire cavalry team almost stopped moving at the same time, without the slightest bit of noise. Li Mofen turned his horse around and faced the people of the Guanyin sect. He gently stroked the halberd tail in the sheepskin pouch with one hand, making up his mind to watch the fire burn across the river. In front of the Qi cultivators, a carriage without a coachman appeared. A young man in black stood quietly in front of the carriage, a huge black tiger lying at his feet. This beast lazily dozed off. Even though it was lying on its stomach, its tall back almost reached the skinny young man's armpit. Li Mofan subconsciously stretched out his hand and rubbed his neck. His memory was still fresh in his mind. When the chief commander first became the commander of the Longxiang army, he and the deputy general Wang Lingbao were not convinced. In the end, both of them went up to the martial arts arena together. Wang Lingbao fought head-on and was kicked 7 to 8 feet away, falling out of the martial arts arena. Li Mofan, on the other hand, managed to withstand a few more blows, but his fate was even worse. He was grabbed by Su Longxiang like a chicken and swung around before being thrown out of the martial arts arena. Su Longxiang did not even bother to pat off the dust on his body. The young man obviously did not have enough fun. He hooked his finger at a large group of captains who were watching the battle, hinting for them to replace Li Mofan and Wang Lingbao. In the end, including the 2 deputy generals, there were 12 captains and more than 40 senior captains. Without exception, they were all beaten up by the new commander. During this period, Su Longxiang suffered no less than 100 punches and kicks. Except for the occasional swaying of his body and moving a step or two, he never fell to the ground. In this way, Su Longxiang was able to secure his position as the commander of the Longxiang army. It was only then that he was able to lead the 10,000 cavalrymen behind him in a reckless charge. Furthermore, Su Longxiang had the leisure and elegance to lead a large group of military officers to act as ordinary crossbowmen and chase down a large group of horse bandits. However, although Li Mofan admired Commander Su's astonishing martial prowess on the battlefield, he was still somewhat worried. After all, the combat on the martial arts field was not a life-and-death battle between 2 armies. Often, the more eye-catching a general was, the easier it was for him to be heavily surrounded. Li Mofan himself had experienced more than 60 battles, big and small. The most soul-stirring battle he had ever experienced was not when he happened to chance upon those famous enemy generals in the midst of 10,000 soldiers. Instead, it was when an inconspicuous old soldier had snuck up on him like a cat and thrust out a sinister saber. Not only did the tip of the saber nearly pierce through Li Mofan's armor, it also nearly twisted Li Mofan's abdomen. The funny thing was that Li Mofan still did not know the appearance of that old saber wielder, who looked like an ordinary soldier. Who was he? Also, Li Mofan had seen many insufferably arrogant military aces. In the end, they either died tragically under a rain of arrows or under the hooves of horses. Not to mention the distant ones, in the Beiliang army right in front of him, there were fish-duck treading crossbows that were specifically used to target enemy generals. In the Spring and Autumn War, who knew how many Jianghu ruffians with great martial prowess had their hearts pierced by these crossbows? The reason Jianghu people were not willing to go to the battlefield and make a name for themselves was largely because of their extraordinary martial prowess. It was very easy for them to be swallowed up by an army that was like a sea of ants. Also, the military had always been a place that paid the most attention to rules. The Jianghu experts were mostly idle and did not want to be restrained. The path of martial arts was already difficult. Since they had already made a name for themselves, why would they go to the military and draw a prison? Li Mofan sighed. Looking at the motionless second son of the great general, he was slightly distracted. He still remembered when he had followed the great general to Beiliang. Along the way, during a celebratory feast, the great general had drunk and raised his cup to point in the direction of Great Peace City. He grinned and said, "The legs of the civil officials kneel there every day. Us old men who lead soldiers to war, only one of us goes to the border. Of the 9 kingdoms of spring and autumn, other than the southern Tang that we threw to Gu Jiantang as leftovers, we have gone through all of them. Now, there are only the 3 provinces of Beiliang left. One day, even if I, Su Shao, am unable to personally bring all of you to the northern Mang royal court, my son will bring all of you there for a walk." Li Mofan exhaled, his gaze becoming determined. After waiting for almost 20 years, he was already in his 40s. Mother*****, his 5-year-old grandson already knew how to tease the neighbor's daughter. There was finally a big battle to fight. Chapter 1195. Su Longxiang lightly twisted his neck. Not only the experts of the Guanyin sect who were skilled in qi divination, even the sect master of the same generation as Sui Xiegu, Tantai Pingjing, looked as if she was facing a great enemy. After stopping her steps, this tall woman frowned. The girl who sold charcoal rolled her eyes. What did this thin and rash brat want to do? Could it be that he wanted to single-handedly overturn the entire Guanyin sect? Could he not distinguish between friend and foe? After she had failed to catch the flood dragon in the Shu lands, her mood had been extremely bad. In order to kill the yellow flood dragon, Mei Yingyi's martial niece had retracted her qi into a bottle, which could be considered a great bargain. Xianxia, who carried the coiling dragon pellet, also did not suffer any losses. Only she was the most pitiful. She had lost 2 pieces of the dragon talisman jade pendant that she had obtained with great difficulty from the tomb of the great Feng Emperor. One jade pendant, after being crushed, could transform into a living spirit puppet. It was truly a priceless treasure. As soon as the girl saw the dark and thin youth who knew his identity, she became irritated. With a thought, she flew out. She did not believe that this murderous brat would really dare to kill someone. Su Longxiang had not completely enlightened himself, but in the end, he was enlightened. He knew that on the lake outside the Yuyan mountain villa, his brother had clashed with these people. Later on, there was a young woman who was a sword embryo, who repeatedly had ill intentions. Su Longxiang came alone to block the way. This was to tell the Guanyin sect that he was not the commander of the 30,000 Longxiang army. He was only the younger brother of Su Fengnian, Huang Manor. As for whether the Guanyin sect understood, and whether they were willing to accept this welcoming gift, Su Longxiang did not care. Su Longxiang was originally hesitating whether to directly beat them up or not. In the end, he saw the barefoot woman, whose body was covered in sword intent and not sword qi, rush over. Su Longxiang lowered his head and looked at his feet. The corner of his mouth curled up. He had encountered someone who also did not like to wear shoes. But that's not the reason why I won't beat you up. The girl selling coal suddenly sensed a majestic murderous aura. She closed her eyes and didn't head straight for Butcher's second son, whose achievements even Nanjiang had heard of. Instead, she tapped lightly on the ground as she flew. Her body made a half-arc in the air and then fell rapidly. Just as her toes were about to touch the ground, she sensed Su Longxiang's attack in advance. Her delicate body bent slightly, and she sped up to cover a distance of 30 to 40 feet. From beginning to end, she was flying and stopping in the air, as if lotuses were blooming under her feet. Li Mofen, who was leisurely watching from the sidelines, clicked his tongue and laughed. She was not simple, and she was even a little girl who had comprehended the mysterious finger technique. With such a beautiful and practical lightness skill, she could do whatever she wanted in Jianghu. Su Longxiang's left foot slid horizontally across the yellow sand for an inch. At the same time, the charcoal girl immediately changed her flying trajectory. Her figure rose several feet, and she retreated a bit upside down. Then her body rotated. Her snow-white long sleeves were faintly discernible, and her spiritual qi was moving. It was even more obvious that she was untraceable before the thunderous attack. Su Longxiang moved. Very straightforwardly, he crashed into the girl with the fancy movements in a straight line. The moment Su Longxiang's knee bent, the girl selling coal was still hesitating whether to ride her sword to defend or use her lightness skill to avoid the sharp edge. Then, in the next moment, she no longer had the chance to attack. Su Longxiang raised his knee in the air and sent the charcoal girl, who the layman thought was trying to knock into him, flying. The speed was so fast that only Tantai Pingjing was able to see the clues. The moment Su Longxiang raised his foot, the girl selling coal had completely lost the initiative. However, when the two collided, the girl still made a defensive gesture of pushing down with both hands. But at that moment, Su Longxiang's 5 fingers grabbed the girl's forehead like hooks and pulled her toward his knee, still sending her flying. Tantai Pingjing squinted her eyes, slowly inhaling and exhaling, ready to attack. The girl selling coal's body rolled in the air, dissipating most of the force. But soon, she was shocked to find that the inconspicuous teenager in black had inexplicably appeared behind her. Next, after the girl selling coal was repelled, she was kicked in the back and fell on the sand with her face flat. A haze appeared between Tantai Pingjing's eyebrows. The lad had several imperceptible pauses when he kicked. It was the superposition of 1-inch strength, which was like rolling thunder. But it was simply against the common sense of martial arts. Ordinary people who practice martial arts would know the importance of concentrating and doing it in one go. Su Longxiang simply appeared and disappeared unpredictably. After a burst of dizziness, everyone saw this teenager dragging one leg of the girl selling coal, slowly walking toward the hundreds of qi cultivators of the Guanyin sect. The girl selling coal even had the heart to die. It was not that she did not want to resist, but this bastard's kick had destroyed all her qi activity, making it chaotic and uncontrollable. That was not all. Intuition told her that if she dared to drive the flying sword with her talent in swordsmanship, this black and thin teenager would really kill her. Su Longxiang dragged the girl selling coal for a while and seemed to be bored. He threw the girl in his hand back to the Guanyin sect like throwing garbage, and then hooked his finger at Tantai Pingjing. His meaning was clear. If the young one was not good enough, the old one could try. Tantai Pingjing was not angry at all, but asked indifferently, "Have you been deliberately suppressing yourself at the boundary between the Vajra realm and the Finger Profound realm? Are you trying to directly skip the celestial realm and become an earth immortal? Before you, no one has been able to do it." Su Longxiang did not speak. He had always listened to his elder brother. When he was young, his elder brother would always tell him stories of the pugilistic world, such as how in the world of martial arts, only speed was invincible, and how one's strength could defeat 10. He did not understand at that time, but he remembered it firmly in his heart. After he was enlightened, he naturally understood it. Also, his elder brother said that when fighting, one could chat while fighting. If one was to kill, one should not talk about the principles of fighting. The fist was the principle. A rider came to Li Mofen's side and reported the military situation. Li Mofen's expression was strange. He cleared his throat and shouted to Su Longxiang, "Commander, His Highness has spoken. You can fight, but you are not allowed to kill." As Li Mofen spoke, he burst into laughter. His Highness also said that if you lose, he will punish you. Li Mofen quivered and immediately came to his senses. He said solemnly, "Commander, this general is just passing on His Highness's words. Don't punish me later." The girl selling coal, who was being held in the arms of a sect elder, wanted to cry but had no tears. She wanted to curse out loud. Su Fingnian and Su Longxiang, these two brothers, were not clear-headed. She wanted more than ever to return to the South Sea and never set foot on the Central Plains again. Chapter 1196. Tantai Pingjing stared at the young man who could be said to be God's favored son with a little pity in her eyes. However, when such a tall and eye-catching woman like her took a step forward, not only did the South Sea Chi trainers and the leading Guanyin sect retreat, even Li Mofen did not dare to take it lightly. He raised his arm and made a gesture that all the generals and soldiers in the Bailiang army could understand. The dragon elephant cavalry suddenly bloomed with an indescribable aura, like a tiger out of its cage, hot and wild. More than 1,000 elite cavalry began to spread out rapidly, forming an aggressive fan-shaped formation. A few groups of roaming cavalry even swept behind the South Sea Chi trainers. Obviously, they had made up their minds to make a big fuss and wrap these arrogant immortals in the South Sea up like dumplings. The charcoal girl was actually not seriously injured, but she did not dare to act rashly because she was severely suppressed by Su Longxiang's momentum. Now that her senior sister was personally involved, she was emboldened. She jumped down to the ground, rubbed her only son, and gnashed her teeth. She could not wait to cut the yellow-skinned young man into pieces and throw his 3 souls and 7 spirits into the most important weapon of the sect, the Moon Well Sky Mirror, which was specially used to suppress evil and evil. There were 5 generations in the Guanyin sect. Tantai Pingjing, who was close to 100 years old and had an almost eternal appearance, and the charcoal girl with a pair of senior sisters with the highest seniority. The age gap between them was so big that it made people speechless. Then there were 6 old elders whose hair was as white as frost. Mei Yingyi, Sunya, and Qi Longzhong were the younger Qi trainers of the next generation. The 4th generation were the direct disciples of the 6 elders. Finally, there were the young boys and girls who had just entered the sect. There were more than 100 Qi trainers of the 5 generations. Almost every one of them had one or a variety of talisman weapons, such as the land-facing celestial painting of the charcoal girl and the dragon pendant that was destroyed when catching the dragon in Shu Land. They were all the most important weapons of the Guanyin sect. In addition, there was the discipline elder's willow branch clear vase, which was only 3 inches high but actually weighed 600 pounds. Naturally, there was a universe inside. Sun Ya's coiling dragon stone block that contained thunder and lightning could suppress evil and evil. It was also a work of God that was in accordance with the way of heaven. Talisman swords were even more common in the field of Qi trainers. It was just that the Guanyin sect was seriously damaged in the dragon-slaying battle in the southern border. Therefore, there was the storm of asking for 81 talisman swords from the Dragon Rock sword furnace of the Yuyan Mountain Villa. Later, there were 2 famous swordsmen in the world who came uninvited, Dong Tai and Sui Xiegu. The latter enjoyed eating swords, which made the Guanyin sect, which had a strong foundation, feel even more difficult to deal with. Tantai Pingjing did not have the demeanor of a master like her junior sister, who had provoked the charcoal girl. She just walked forward like an ordinary strong woman, as if she had met an acquaintance and wanted to greet him. But this time, Su Longxiang waited for an opportunity for a longer time. Especially when Tantai Pingjing imperceptibly paused or even took a step back, Su Longxiang was in a trance, as if he had returned to his childhood in the prince's mansion on Mount Qingliang and became a silly Huang man. Su Longxiang seemed to have thought of something. He scratched his head and looked relieved. His brother had said that when encountering something that he could not figure out, he should just stop thinking about it. Whether he could beat his opponent or not, he should prove it with his fists. If he could not beat his opponent, he should just run away. The green hills would not change, and the green water would flow forever. At the worst, he could just say that he would meet his opponent again someday. Without the knot in his heart, Su Longxiang's entire aura and appearance changed completely. This was not strange in the eyes of the dragon elephant cavalry led by Li Mofen, but in the eyes of the qi cultivators of the Guanyin sect who were good at observing aura, it was strange. With the war imminent, when experts faced the enemy, the change of the state of mind was a big taboo. The kind of freak who broke through the bottleneck in several life and death battles and was able to rise from the brink of death was, after all, a rare existence. In the Liang Wulin where heroes gathered for the past 100 years, Wang Xianji counted as one, Gu Jiantang counted as half, and the other outstanding figures like Li Chungang and Chao Chongqing, who were publicly recognized as having outstanding talent, also rose in realms naturally. Of course, after Su Fengyan defeated Wang Xianji, as many rumors, true or false, gradually spread, Su Fengyan became another martial arts genius after Wang Xianji who was proficient in using battle to nurture battle. Otherwise, the people of Jianghu really could not understand how a playboy who had not even practiced martial arts for 5 years could leap to the top and become the champion of Jianghu. Was it not enough that the Su family had one Su Fengyan, who was said to be invincible in the world, and now there was another Su Longxiang? All the good things in the world had been taken by the Su family. Did they still want to give others a way to live? Was it possible that one day Su Fengyan would get tired of being the world's #1 and hand over the #1 position to his younger brother? Nowadays, the so-called powerful and influential families in the Jianghu were all based on whether or not there were 2 first-pin experts in the sect who could stand side by side. Of course, if only one person reached the celestial state, it was enough to lead the sect and overlook the Jianghu. But there was absolutely no reason for one family or one sect to have 2 experts in martial arts. Even the Wu family sword tomb could not do this, because it was much more difficult than the 3 princes of the 4th generation, the father and the son, and the 2 top scholars in the imperial court. At this time, in the eyes of the qi cultivator, the flow of the qi of the prominent young man was like a ball of prairie fire turning into a pool of stagnant water. A moment ago it was full of vitality, but in the next moment, it was completely lifeless and lifeless. Tantai Pingjing, whose figure was even better than that of the northern warriors, stopped and walked. Finally, she was only 5 or 6 steps away from Su Longxiang. She lowered her head and looked at the interesting young man who was born as King Kong but deliberately suppressed the rising of his realm. She smiled and said, "Come and hit me. If you hit me, you win. In the future, I will follow your brother's orders in Liuzhou." Su Longxiang shook his head with a serious expression. Tantai Pingjing smiled knowingly. She had already understood the young man's meaning. That is, in the territory under the jurisdiction of Beiliang, no matter who it was, as long as they set foot in Beiliang, they would have to listen to her brother. This principle did not require him to defeat anyone to win. This was a matter of course. Before her brother inherited the title and became the king of Beiliang, Su Fengyan's words had always been the loudest in Mount Qingliang. He was even more powerful than their father, Su Shao. Now that he had become the vassal king, not only his mansion, but also the whole Beiliang should be the same. Tantai Pingjing was not angry. She still had a clean smile on her face. The qi cultivators of Fulong of the North sect all said that the Guanyin sect was carved out of the same mold. It was not without roots. Except that the qi cultivators of this sect all wore white clothes and white boots. Even their temperament was the same. They all had a kind of otherworldly spirit. They did not respect the common people or the kings, but only ghosts and gods. Every qi cultivator left the sect, except for dry food and clothes. They were not allowed to carry any worldly possessions other than the talisman weapons that they had cultivated for many years. They had no attachments and no worldly karma. Only then could they achieve a pure Taoist heart. For example, Once the Qi cultivators of all generations of the Guanyin sect entered the isolated island in the South Sea to practice Taoism, it was tantamount to cutting off all the fate with their birth parents. Even if their parents had passed away, they would never go to worship them. The Tao of Heaven was ruthless, but there were common laws. Qi cultivators were the fishermen who mended the wide net of Tao of Heaven and caught the fish that escaped the net. Therefore, the great immortal Qi Xianxia on the demon-slaying platform once sent a message to the Guanyin sect. In fact, it was more like a question: Tao of Heaven has 50. Why does the Tao of Heaven only give rise to 49? The sage said that people escape from one, but where is the one? This was the reason why Tan Tai Pingjing had been in closed-door training all these years. At that time, Dong Tai raised the sea and drowned the Guanyin sect with his sword. His momentum was imposing, but in fact, it was not the real reason why Tan Tai Pingjing came out of closed-door training in advance. It was because she had been in closed-door training for many years but could not find the one. This time, Tan Tai Pingjing moved the sect to the north because she wanted to find it somewhere else. Tan Tai Pingjing had always been silent in the Guanyin sect. She did not take any disciples. She had been in charge of the sect for nearly 60 years and had accumulated a lot of power. Even the elders would feel uncomfortable when they saw this young suzerain who was almost enlightened, not to mention the juniors like Mei Yingyi, Sunya, and Qi Longzhong. They would be satisfied if they could talk to the suzerain who was really high in status and figure for a year. These people all felt that the suzerain had a rare affection from the bottom of her heart for this young man. Regardless of gender, many disciples of the Guanyin sect who did not have a deep heart were a little jealous. Tan Tai Pingjing was not far away from Su Longxiang. Her smile was tranquil and quiet. However, a little illusory green water droplet appeared in front of her out of nowhere. The water droplet fell down and formed two water lines. It was like a drawing of the moon, and ripples were bursting. In an instant, a big round mirror was constructed between her and Su Longxiang. The mirror was sparkling and the green water ripples were rippling. They looked at each other and their vision was blurred. From Su Longxiang's side, he could only see the rough outline of the other party. The Qi cultivators of the Guanyin sect looked at each other in dismay. Even the highly experienced charcoal girl was extremely moved. In the final analysis, the reason why the Guanyin sect could compete with the northern dragon warriors of the entire Liang dynasty was actually because of two talisman weapons. The celestial painting from the painting saint of the Dafeng dynasty was to suppress Wuxia in Jianghu. The moon well heavenly mirror in front of the suzerain's senior sister was to suppress all kinds of bell spirits in the world who insisted on breaking the shackles of Tao. Both of them were favored by the Reiki of heaven and earth because of fate. However, the more powerful things were, the more they would not be controlled and wanted to cross the thunder pool. The Guanyin sect had to suppress these two guys who were not satisfied with the gift of Tao of Heaven. After Tan Tai Pingjing appeared in the mirror, she smiled and stretched out her hand to Su Longxiang, indicating that the young man did not need to show mercy and could just do his best. Chapter 1197. Then, everyone saw Su Longxiang fiercely crash into the mirror and appear in front of Tan Tai Pingjing. He punched down. Most of the Guanyin sect disciples, who had never seen their sect's national weapon in their lives, let out a subconscious gasp. But then, they saw their sect master's entire body shatter like an artifact made of colored glass, turning into fireflies that filled the sky. Without any hesitation, Su Longxiang rushed to the next place. As expected, another mirror soon appeared in front of him. After he crashed into it again, Tan Tai Pingjing, who had broken the glass body, repeated this tirelessly. On the yellow sand ground, in the short time it took for an incense stick to burn, Su Longxiang had entered the mirror and broken the glass no less than 100 times. Every time before the body was broken, Tan Tai Pingjing would always have a calm smile. The fiercer Su Longxiang's attacks were, the more it set off her confidence and the profoundness of her Taoist technique. A lieutenant rode to Li Mofen's side. He was full of doubts and could not help but ask, "General, what is going on? Is that woman really a deity?" Although Li Mofen was proficient in all kinds of martial arts and was a top expert in cavalry on the battlefield, he had never experienced the obscure supernatural powers of the Qi cultivators. He could not make heads or tails of it, but he could not put down his pride and say that he did not know in front of his subordinates. He could only pretend to be profound and said slowly, "The Qi cultivators of the north and south have their own merits. The north sect is like a big rat stealing food from a big warehouse, but what they consume is the emperor's aura. As for the group of people from Guanyin sect in the south, They focus on eating clouds and thunder from heaven and earth to nourish their spirit and qi. The strange mirror of the Guanyin sect master is probably similar to the Taoist's heaven and earth sleeve and the Buddhist's Mount Sumeru in a mustard seed. The bearded lieutenant held back for a long time and laughed dryly. "General, you are really knowledgeable. You even know this. No wonder the general said that you are one of the top Confucian generals in our Beiliang army." Li Mofen laughed and scolded, "Get lost. After so many years of flattery, your skills have not improved at all. What Confucian general? I earned the position of the deputy commander of the Longxiang army by leading the troops time and time again. Which Confucian general is not a bastard hiding behind the battlefield and waving a fan and talking nonsense?" The lieutenant said with grievance, "I want to be a Confucian general." Li Mofen sneered, "Look at your sloppy pig slaughtering appearance. Don't even think about being a Confucian general in your next life." On the battlefield, Su Longxiang, one's disciples of the Guanyin sect were gathered. Obviously, he used the military strategy of besieging the city. Guanyin sect master could escape but his disciples could not. Of the Guanyin sect master. But his disciples could not. Guanyin sect master of the Guanyin sect could escape, but his disciples could not. Of Guanyin sect master could. Tantai Pingjing appeared behind Su Longxiang. With her back to the dragon elephant cavalry's fan-shaped formation, she reached out and patted the mirror in front of her. In the next moment, a mirror appeared in front of Mei Yingyi and the Guanyin sect disciples. Su Longxiang rushed past and arrived in front of Tantai Pingjing in the blink of an eye. This was a scene that went against the rules of the world and was extremely strange. Su Longxiang's stubborn nature came up. He did not rush towards the woman who did not dare to face him head-on. He turned back and continued to run towards the Guanyin sect disciples. Instead, he ran even faster. For the first time he changed direction. His speed was so fast that people could only see a blurry figure. Then, within a radius of 1,000 feet, Su Longxiang was everywhere. This scene was very similar to the method used by Wang Xianji in the battle with Useless Monk. In the world of martial arts, as long as one reached the peak, all paths led to the same destination. There was no escape from the two words, speed and accuracy. One was to take the initiative, the other was to have a clear target. Having both was equivalent to being in an invincible position and achieving victory. In the battle of swordsmanship in the world, no matter how big the differences between the two factions were, there was no objection to the two words of speed and accuracy. The peach blossom sword god Dong Tai was able to suppress all the swordsmen in the world before Li Chungang reappeared in Jianghu because his flying sword had the reputation of flowing fire in the heavens. As time went by, Su Longxiang still could not touch a corner of the clothes of Tantai Pingjing and the disciples of the Guanyin sect. Even Li Mofen was a little anxious, not to mention the group of officers and commandants who were as rough and unyielding as the sandstorm in the northwest. They were all eager to have a try. As soon as they heard the order, they would spur their horses to charge and kill everyone, regardless of whether they were immortals or chi trainers. At this moment, a black dot in the distance was approaching steadily. Gradually, people could see the figure clearly. He came alone and stood outside the dragon elephant cavalry and the Guanyin sect. The three of them were like two horns to each other. But 1,000 dragon elephant cavalry and more than 100 chi trainers, who had the absolute advantage in numbers, could not take away the slightest bit of the man's elegance and momentum. He stood there alone, completely overshadowing the limelight of the two. The Beiliang army, which had the best combat power in the world, had always only recognized two things. The Su, in General Su Zhao's name, and the means of subduing people by force. In fact, in the final analysis, it was the word force. Because the old Prince Liang, Su Shao, was the king of Beiliang, who was the pillar of the country and had great military achievements. He won his position by killing half of the young men in the spring and autumn period. Then after Su Shao, another person from the Su family took over the vacancy left by the death of Ran Tuesday originally. Most people thought that this was a feat that even the gods could not do after Su Zhao's death. But that person did it. It was very simple. He killed Wang Xianji. At this moment, Su Fengnian was standing here. When he received the news that the Guanyin sect and the Wu family's sword mound had entered the country respectively, he naturally valued the latter more. He was prepared to personally go to the border between the two provinces to welcome them. As for his younger brother, Huang Man-er, it did not matter whether he was escorting the Qi cultivators of the South Sea or showing off his strength. With how much Su Fengnian doted on Huang Man'er, there was nothing in the world that Huang Man'er could not do. But at the last moment, Su Fengnian was still not at ease. After all, the wealth that the Guanyin sect had accumulated over hundreds of years could not be underestimated. The charcoal girl's crafty tricks in Yanji County and the land pilgrimage map almost caused him, the so-called most powerful person in the world, to fall into her trap. Therefore he changed his mind halfway. He wanted to see Huang Man'er with his own eyes before he went to welcome the 100 withered swordsmen of the Sword Mound. Perhaps Su Fengnian himself did not feel that there was anything wrong with looking on with folded arms. However, whether it was the 1,000 brave and valiant dragon elephant cavalry led by Li Mofen, or the 100 over Qi refinement warriors of the South Sea who were ignorant and inexperienced but had heard of his name like thunder, they all felt a kind of silent and enormous pressure. Especially those cavalry soldiers under the Su flag. They all subconsciously tightened their grip on their iron spears. They were afraid that the vassal king would look down on their invincible Long Xiang army. And to the Qi cultivators, that Wang Xianji of the martial emperor city was the biggest fish that escaped the net in the world. But no matter if it was the Qi cultivators of the south or the north, they could not do anything to him. Then, with the death of the old monster Wang, this suffocating feeling that was enough to make people despair was imperceptibly transferred to the young vassal king. Who dared to face this person as an enemy? This person wasn't someone who could be challenged just because they had more people. At the very least, no matter how many people there were, could they be more than the 300,000 Bailiang cavalry under his command? Tantai Pingjing turned her head and looked at the slightly abrupt slender figure in the distance. Under her eyes, there was a trace of indescribable complex emotions. Su Longxiang had already fallen into a state of madness. He lowered his head and clenched his fists. He was far from being exhausted, but he began to gasp for breath like an ancient fierce beast. His qi had traveled no less than 700 miles in an instant. This had already crossed the Dragon Gate threshold of 600 miles in the new martial arts list. Tantai Pingjing withdrew her gaze. Coincidentally, Su Longxiang turned his head and she saw the young man's red eyes. If it was just a naughty and mischievous young man's playfulness before, and he did not really want to hurt people, then at this moment, Su Longxiang really had the intention to kill. He had a pure heart. Doing good came from his heart, and doing evil was also straightforward. Chapter 1198. There was a saying in Tianluan, sage Zhang of Confucianism, that the way of heaven was constant. It did not exist for sages, nor did it die for ferocious people. It meant that the way of heaven was unpredictable. Although man was the head of all spirits, he could not interfere with the eternal operation of the way of heaven. This undoubtedly brought great confusion to Qi trainers who carried out justice on behalf of heaven. They had to be careful every time they went fishing, for fear that they would go in the opposite direction of the way of heaven. At that time, Qi trainers would have to bear the karma. This was also why Taoist immortals who cultivated themselves alone could often ascend to heaven, but great Qi trainers often could not die well, let alone become immortals. For example, at this time, it was difficult for Tantai Pingjing to judge whether Su Longxiang was good or bad, and whether she should detain his soul into the Moonwell. In fact, in the Moonwell Sky Mirror, in addition to those recognized evil leaders, there were many famous sages. However, Qi trainers often kept the latter a secret. The reason why gentlemen were often beheaded for 5 generations was that Qi trainers were often the executioners. What sages did might be good for the common people or benefit the country, but they did not necessarily follow the way of heaven. In history, there were so many earth-shaking reforms. The common people benefited, but those who carried out the reforms often ended miserably, and even might not be reincarnated after death. As the Confucianism said, although there were thousands of people, this majestic heroic spirit was passed down from generation to generation, but it was not necessarily a blessing for the individual. However, this was precisely the most valuable thing about those scholars who helped the world. The young lord standing in the distance sneered at scholars when he was a teenager. In Gangnam-do, he even dared to ask Liang Tongshi Sword Immortal, who was now Wang Chaodong, if he could sell some benevolence, righteousness, and morality. The reason why he had changed his view of scholars over the years was that he could look further and higher after reaching a high position. He had more and more respect for scholars who really cared about the world and had no regrets. Because in the world, those who had a heart were often the ones who carried the burden and staggered forward to open the way for the future generations. Wang Xianji was like that in Jianghu, and so was Sun Ping and Zhang Julu. Huang Sonjia was even more so. This kind of people, even if they were enemies, could be killed but not hated. The founding of a prosperous dynasty was always made by warriors to open the way and scholars to build the road conscientiously. Only then could the common people walk on that road happily and comfortingly. Tantai Pingjing's eyes were still filled with pity as she looked at the butcher's second son in front of her. Liang and Bailiang, one of the nominal territories, were in a deadlock. Removing the vassals was the general trend, but resisting Baimang's iron cavalry was a top priority. The imperial court was not at ease with letting the shrewd Gu Jiantang be a king with a different surname, but they also could not allow the two generations of the Su family to take advantage of their achievements. On the other hand, Su Zhao's military achievements had reached the point where no one could take credit for them. So many outrageous killings, but Su Zhao's life was tough and he stood upright. So God gave him a way out and let him die of old age. However, the old man's wife and 4 children were inevitably affected. Everyone had a rough life. If Su Jihu was not the reincarnation of ancestor Lu, Hong Shixiang, he would have died of an illness long ago. As for the remaining 3, even if Su Weisheng was not the biological daughter of Su Xiao and Wu Su, most of them did not have any enviable results. Tantai Pingjing entered Bailiang because she vaguely saw traces of the one. She wanted to see with her own eyes how the young king of Bailiang turned the tide, how he changed the fate of the siblings and even blessed their descendants. This kind of action was even more difficult than slaughtering the flood dragon with human strength. Tantai Pingjing sighed softly. Su Longxiang had also finished accumulating power. With him as the center, the surrounding sand and stones were blown away. If it were ordinary people, they would only see the momentum of the second son of the butcher. But in the eyes of Tantai Pingjing, who had hundreds of years of experience, it was the appearance of a python that almost became a dragon. It was born irritable and barbaric. When Tantai Pingjing was in the prime of her life, she inadvertently bestowed the title of a white snake. Bestowing the title was a relatively obscure Taoist term. It was one level lower than the legendary celestial being God. Ordinary people might not know what the emperor's words were. The emperor's words contained the heaven's constitution and the prophecy of the Taoist immortal, but most of them had heard that monks didn't lie. They were used to nagging children after they said something wrong and let the children spit a few times to show that they took back their rude words. This was why the words created by the sages made ghosts and gods cry. After the words were spoken, it was also unpredictable and mysterious. Tantai Pingjing did not think much at that time. She just felt close to the white snake with a tail of more than 100 feet. She prayed for the white snake to become a dragon. The huge white snake as thick as a water tank actually shed tears like a human. Then, it instantly shed its snake skin for the 8th time without stagnation or any pain. Her head had a flood dragon horn. Tantai Pingjing, who was just an ordinary chi cultivator, just casually bestowed the white snake with a casual title, which made the white snake become a dragon in one step. After the white flood dragon jumped into the river, it stretched out its tongue and wiped Tantai Pingjing's arm. Then, it reluctantly jumped into the river in the surging wind and clouds. Her master heard the news and came over. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He only sighed that fools had fool's luck. Later, Tantai Pingjing knew that the spiritual creatures in the world, especially the big snake, even the Taoist master of Dragon Tiger Mountain, who was the feather-robed Taoist master, only dared to proceed step by step and bestowed the title of Flood Dragon. He dared not to overestimate himself and mention the body of a real dragon. Tantai Pingjing's action was tantamount to tying the merits of several generations to the white snake. The two were closely related. If the white snake finally became a dragon and ascended, she could get a great opportunity through reincarnation. But if the white snake failed, then Tantai Pingjing would share the trials and tribulations with it and would never be reincarnated. Even all the people close to her would be stained with evil karma. Fortunately, Tantai Pingjing's master was very optimistic about the white snake. Otherwise, once they had an evil relationship, no matter how much he valued Tantai Pingjing, he would expel this disciple from the sect to avoid a monstrous disaster that would bring disaster to the sect. Fortunately, Tantai Pingjing's master was very optimistic about the white snake. Otherwise, once they had an evil relationship, no matter how much he valued Tantai Pingjing, he would expel this disciple from the sect in order to avoid a monstrous disaster that would bring disaster to the sect. Fortunately, Tantai Pingjing's master was very optimistic about the white snake. Otherwise, once they had an evil relationship, no matter how much he valued Tantai Pingjing, he would expel this disciple from the sect to avoid a monstrous disaster. After that, perhaps only the young leader of Wudong, Li Yufu, would have such a good opportunity. At that time, a carp jumped out of the river into his arms on the bank of Guangling River, and this Taoist sat down holding the carp. I'm Li Yufu, you and I are fated. If everything in the world can really cultivate, you and I work together to cultivate the great Tao. I only hope to see you again in a few hundred years. However, the world only knew that the Wudong leader suppressed the evil dragon of Earth Lung Mountain, and did not know such a secret. Facing the aggressive Su Longxiang, Tan Tai Ping Jing somehow showed a trace of absent-mindedness for the first time. Even the young disciples of Guanin's sect, who were 2 or 3 generations younger than her, noticed it. This tall woman, who had already reached the realm of returning to her original state but deliberately kept her appearance in her 30s, suddenly felt a little sad. She thought of her master, the man who was always difficult to look up to. When they stood together in the past, she was always taller than her master. When her master wanted to talk to her, he had to raise his head. Every time at that time, her master, who was omniscient and omnipotent in her impression, would feel a little helpless. Before her master disappeared without a trace and left her, he had a catchphrase, "You silly big guy." Back then, after her master had passed away, she had deduced from a few words from an elderly elder that her master was probably a lucky person who had seen through the mysteries of heaven several times. When luck was up, he would live, and when luck was down, he would leave. However, Tan Tai Ping Jing did not deliberately guess which secret figure in history he was, let alone dare to deduce. This was also a taboo for venerables. At the moment, Su Longxiang's straight collision interrupted the reverie of the training Qi master, which made Tan Tai Ping Jing angry for no reason. This was something that even Xie Fei Yu, a Confucian scholar in Sichuan, could not do. Tan Tai Ping Jing quickly raised her hand and lifted the mirror that even the founder of Guanin's sect did not know the exact origin. She wanted to teach this young man a lesson. A woman's mind was like a needle at the bottom of the sea. Even Tan Tai Ping Jing, who was equal to an immortal, could not escape from the stereotype. At this moment, a cold voice sounded in everyone's ears. Huang Man or fighting with you Qi trainers is almost the same as civil officials and military generals who insist on comparing merits. It's boring. The next moment, a figure rushed through the moon well sky mirror before Su Longxiang and walked to Tan Tai Ping Jing. When he broke the mirror, there was no ripple on the moon well sky mirror. But after passing through the mirror, the water ripples jumped happily. It was like an old object meeting an old owner. The mirror was not like a mirror, but like the broken moon in the well. Su Fengnian came to the front of the unusually tall Guanin sect master. He had to raise his head slightly to look at her at the same level. He smiled politely and then turned to Huang Man. He rubbed his head. The young man, who was still manic and restless, immediately calmed down. Tan Tai Ping Jing looked at the back of the young man, her lips trembling slightly. She said the 2 words, but they were silent. Chapter 1199. If it was said that the Guanin sect did not take Su Longxiang seriously, but after Su Fengnian personally came here, the atmosphere clearly showed signs of leaning towards the local tyrant. Fortunately, Su Fengnian did not use his power to bully others. Instead, he took the initiative to walk towards the old woman that he had met once outside Yuyan Mountain Villa. He greeted her amiably and even jokingly said to Mei Yingyi, who had fought well on the lake, "This fairy sister, your finger sword technique has benefited this king greatly." Later on, when he fought with others, he secretly learned it and put it to great use. "I hope fairy sister does not mind." Mei Yingyi lived up to her manly name. Facing this powerful vassal king who had stirred up the Jianghu in the imperial court, she did not have stage fright. However, her smooth and creamy cheeks still had the redness of a beautiful woman. Her voice was soft but not seductive. She jokingly said, "It is Mei Yingyi's honor to be able to enter the king's discerning eyes with my insignificant skill. However, I have a bold request. That is, if the king has the opportunity to fight with others in the future, before you use the upper finger sword technique, you must first say that this is the unique skill of Mei Yingyi of the Guanin sect of the South Sea." Su Fengnian could not help but laugh. This is possible. To be honest, this king had half a master before, the sword Jiuhuang. You should have heard of this before. At that time, this king had not yet learned martial arts and the blade. He thought that when he went to Jianghu and fought with others, no matter what, as long as he could make the name of this king appear, then this king would be able to brag and flatter to various heroines. Therefore, this king and fairy sister are the same kind of people. Can we be considered as heroes who appreciate each other? Mei Yingyi covered her mouth and smiled. She did not enthusiastically agree with anything. Instead, she carefully controlled the situation and did not dare to climb up the pole. If she really thought that these big shots who held authority were merciful bodhisattvas, it was hard to fathom a ruler's heart. Accompanying a ruler was like accompanying a tiger. She was just a small character. Maybe one day she would be eaten until not even her bones were left, and they would still complain that it was not enough. However, Mei Yingyi was overjoyed to have the king of Beiliang address her as Sister Fairy. She didn't try to hide the joy on her face. Su Fengnian turned his head and looked at a certain young Qi refinement warrior who was sneakily hiding behind his senior brother. He smiled and said, "Why? Can't you recognize this king who has changed his hair color? Back then you were very arrogant. Once you saw this king, you would casually sit on the river." The young man's face turned red. He walked out from behind his fellow disciples and bitterly said, "To be able to exchange blows with Wuxia, I have no regrets in this life. Even if Wuxia wants to beat or kill me today, I, Su Qingxing, will not complain at all. I won't dare to retaliate either." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Oh, you're from the same family. Then I really have no reason to fight with you. Now that you're in Lu province, don't treat yourself as an outsider. If you need any heavenly materials and earthly treasures that Beiliang has, feel free to ask. For the sake of our family, this king doesn't have the face to hide anything." The young man chuckled and said, "Then I won't treat you as an outsider. When the time comes, if Wuxia is stingy, I, Su Qingxing, will run to the entrance of the Wuxia residence and make a scene." Su Fengnian nodded and dismissed it with a smile. The girl who sold charcoal fiercely turned her head and rolled her eyes. She increasingly disliked this treacherous fellow, who had a honeyed mouth and a sword in his heart. After that, Su Fengnian asked for a warhorse from the Dragon Elephant Cavalry and symbolically sent this batch of Qi cultivators from the South Sea for a period of time. Riding side by side with Tantai Pingjing, the sect master of the Guanyin sect, who had already completely recovered her calm state of mind, asked indifferently, "When will the Beimang army go south?" Su Fengnian also did not treat this as a military secret that could not be divulged. He said frankly, "Some small-scale battles will be very fast. At the beginning of the year, they were stunned by my younger brother's 10,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry. The new king of the South Yard, Dong Zhuo, and the Empress of Beimang should not be able to swallow this grievance. Even if they can, in order to appease the army, they urgently need a hearty victory to make a good start and get a good omen. However, as for which border of the three provinces in cool and flowing, Beimang is also not sure. They can only cope with all changes by remaining unchanged. Sect Master Tantai, you want to use this to accumulate merit. This king also needs you to give blessings to the fallen soldiers. I hope that both of us can." Tantai Pingjing smiled and continued the topic, "Happy business." Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment. This does not seem like something that would come out of the mouth of an otherworldly expert like Sect Master. What followed was a natural long silence. Their identities and ages were as different as heaven and earth. It was really difficult to find a topic to exchange pleasantries. Before leaving, Tantai Pingjing finally said something irrelevant. "My late master once set foot in the Jianghu of the Central Plains twice. The first time was to go to the demon-slaying platform of Dragon Tiger Mountain to discuss Taoism with immortal Qi. The second time was to find the whereabouts of a white flood dragon. My late master once left behind a will. That white flood dragon was different from the common river boas. It did not follow the river into the sea but swam upstream. My late master only calculated that the white flood dragon swam to the gate of hell and then disappeared." Su Fengnian sat high on the horse without holding the reins. He folded his hands in his sleeves and said with a smile, "Sect Master Tantai, are you guessing that the white flood dragon sneaked all the way to Beiliang?" This king casually asked. The common people worship the flood dragon as deities. But you Qi cultivators, especially Sect Master who has achieved the Tao, can hunt and kill the flood dragon. Why do you care about the whereabouts of a river flood dragon that has not yet turned into a dragon? Could it be that there is a reason behind this? If it does not involve the private affairs of the Guanyin sect, can you tell me something?" Tantai Pingjing shook her head and said in a stiff tone, "This has nothing to do with the situation in Beiliang. I have no comment." Su Fengnian did not force her nor was he interested in getting to the bottom of the matter. He just smiled and did not take it to heart. The 1,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry under the direct command of Li Mo Fan did not continue to escort. Su Fengnian returned the warhorse to the ordinary cavalryman and sat behind his younger brother Su Longxiang, who was his coachman. Obviously, his fellow soldiers were very envious of the guy whose warhorse was sat on by the young lord. The horseman also regarded it as a great honor and had a complacent look on his face. After the bearded lieutenant approached, he patted the horseman's head and scolded with a smile. "Motherfucker, you brat, don't be so sentimental and ask me for your military merit in the future." Although the cavalryman was not very old, he was a veteran of the Xiang army. Last time, he had cut off the head of a northern barbarian. At that time, he only used it as the head of an ordinary Beimang cavalryman to calculate his military merit. Later on, from the news that spread from Beimang's southern court, he found out that the fellow was a member of the royal family with the surname of Yelu. Although he was only a branch of Yelu and could not be considered the purest descendant of the royal family, according to Beiliang's military law, he should at least be a lieutenant. This brave soldier was not convinced and ran to the bearded lieutenant every 2 to 3 days to ask for his military merit. In fact, everyone knew that being a lieutenant was secondary. The main reason was to take the opportunity to squeeze the wine out of the lieutenant who loved wine like his life. This time, when the prince wanted to borrow a horse, the lieutenant had a bright idea and gave this opportunity to that brat. He thought that he should let go of the few remaining jars of wine, right? Unexpectedly, the cavalryman glared at him and said, "Lieutenant, let me say this first. This is a different matter. If you dare to go back on your word, do you believe that this subordinate will not report this matter to the prince?" Report this matter to the prince? None of the soldiers around the cavalryman felt that there was anything wrong with his words. In our Beiliang, the king of Beiliang was the rightful emperor. He only lacked a dragon robe and a dragon throne. It was just that our prince did not care for those two things. The bearded lieutenant gritted his teeth and said, "F***K, don't talk nonsense with this old man. Today, I'll make things clear to you, brat. When we go back, I'll give you an entire jar of wine. How about it? If you dare to take another sip of wine, this old man will strip you naked and hang you on the back of a horse. Then, we'll circle the camp a few times." The cavalryman grinned and said, "Deal." Hanging naked on the back of a horse and circling the camp was a punishment unique to the Xiang army. As long as it was a native of the Dragon Elephant Cavalry, including the 2 vice-generals, Li Mofan and Zhang Lingbao, almost all of the rebellious fellows had had a taste of this before. A wily old fox who was so unlucky that he had died 8 times was proud of it. He always liked to say to the younger generation in the army that the taste was so memorable that it was even more satisfying than riding on the bed. Of course, there were not many who were willing to believe it. Li Mofan looked at the carriage and hesitated a bit. In the end, he had his personal soldiers pull back a bit. Su Fengnian turned around and lifted the curtain to look at the bright red talisman armor. It was hard to tell if it was in a standing or sitting position. When no one was wearing it, it was still half the height of a person. It stood alone in the carriage and emitted a bone-chilling aura. After Su Fengnian had collected 5 sets of talisman armor, he strictly ordered the 2 Mahist masters at the back of Mount Qingliang to forge a new set of talisman armor. This was to ensure that his younger brother, Huang Manor, would have something to rely on when charging and breaking through enemy lines in the future. At the same time, it was to forcibly imprison Su Longxiang's higher realm. Su Longxiang did not feel good every time he put on the talisman armor. It was no different from a kind of torture. However, as long as it was something his older brother, Su Fengnian, wanted him to do, he would never ask why. Back then, Su Shao used both the carrot and the stick, but he was still unable to make his youngest son apprentice to the old celestial master Zhao Shituan and then go to Mount Longhu to learn martial arts. Su Fengnian returned after 3 years of traveling, and a simple sentence was all that was needed. Not to mention the imperial vassal Wang family, even between brothers of ordinary landowning households, there were all kinds of differences. If it wasn't a struggle for status, then it was a struggle for seniority. How could it be like the Beiliang Su family, where brothers would go on blind dates? Chapter 1200. After Su Fengnian became the king of Beiliang, he first had to subdue the civil officials, pacify the border army, and fight against Wang Xianji. He never had a chance to talk to Huang Manor, or rather, he never knew how to talk to Huang Manor. After Huang Manor was enlightened, he calmed down and had his own ideas. After the expansion of the army, the Xiang army, which had 30,000 soldiers and horses, was well managed by the youth. However, Su Fengnian was used to treating Huang Manor as the child with 2 snots. When Huang Manor grew up, He felt a sense of unfamiliarity that he didn't know how to talk to him. Occasionally, Su Fengnian would remember that Su Xiao probably had the same problem when facing his rebellious self. Of course, when Su Fengnian was the same age as Huang Manor, he was truly a lawless demon king. Su Xiao definitely didn't dare to scold him and didn't know how to persuade him. Although after the Wang Fei passed away, as the general, he was both a father and mother, in the end, he was still a rough man. Leading troops to war and governing the army didn't make sense, so he just fought until they were convinced. However, when it came to the eldest son, how could he be so carefree? Su Fengnian looked at the yellow sand that was even more barren than Liangzhou. He smiled and asked softly, "Huang Manor, did you miss your father?" With his back to his brother, Su Longxiang nodded vigorously. Su Fengnian continued, "Speaking of our mother's early death, outsiders all say that it was to give birth to you, the result of exchanging a life for a life. In reality, logically speaking, mother's lifeline was left behind by the white clothes case. If Su Xiao didn't have me, the eldest son, or us two sons, he would definitely be able to live out the rest of his life as a king with a different surname. After death, his posthumous title would be extremely honorable, and he definitely wouldn't be that bullshit, Wu Li. So you, the younger brother, would never be the one to say sorry to our parents. I also know that Su Xiao has always been biased. You and my two sisters are not as good as me." Su Longxiang held the reins and didn't say anything. Su Fengnian leaned against the wall of the carriage and looked at the sky that was higher and wider than anywhere else in Liang. He said softly, "Su Xiao is actually very good to us, to the point that he can't be any better. Except for my two sisters, I am the older brother and you are the younger brother, so it's different. But this isn't because Su Xiao is really biased. He doesn't feel sorry for you and your two sisters. But he was a boor who joined the army to kill enemies at the age of 14. How could he know the difficulties of his children as a father? After Su Xiao left, in order to deal with Wang Xianji, I went into an out-of-body state. That was how I saw Su Xiao when he was young. Not as impressive as he was after he went to Beiliang. I saw Su Xiao standing outside the Grand Council office without bending his back or crippling his legs. It rained for an entire night, but those powerful officials closed their doors and refused to see him. They refused to give a single soldier a mouthful of food. Su Xiao stood like that for an entire night. After winning a battle, Su Xiao sneaked to the battlefield where the corpses of the soldiers did not have time to be dragged away. He squatted there and whimpered. It was not at all like after he had us. He said that he would be unstoppable wherever he pointed his troops, and he would be like a tiger swallowing tens of thousands of miles. I also saw Su Zhao's downfall after he became a general. He had to share hard buns with Master, Zhao Chongling and the others. Su Fengnian smiled and looked up at the clean sky with narrowed eyes. To be honest, our father can only be less tired when he's gone. If it weren't for the fact that he's worried about us, he would have gone down to accompany Mother long ago. He's just holding on with a strong will and fighting with the King of Hell. Su Fengnian straightened and looked away. He said in a deep voice, "People in Beiliang have said for a long time that the Zhao court is making things difficult everywhere. Su Xiao has military power. Why did he not just rebel? Beimang has Beiliang's 300,000 cavalry. They are bound to take over the Central Plains. The history books are just servant girls that the founding dynasty can paint as they please. How can the Su family's reputation be lacking? Su Xiao didn't tell us why. I also thought about this problem that wasn't a problem. I felt that there was no reason to talk about it. If Su Xiao wasn't such a person, he wouldn't have been able to reach northern Liang. Just like how Su Xiao treated me and you, Huang Manor, there is no reason. He is the father, we are his sons. He feels heartache. It is that simple." Su Fengnian unconsciously pulled up his sleeves out of habit. He said, "As sons, we have to make sure that Su Xiao as a father doesn't get scolded by the future generations. It's just as simple. I, Su Fengnian, am guarding the northwest. It is a responsibility that Su Xiao gave me. It is my duty. It is even simpler. As his older brother, I don't want my younger brother to die on the battlefield. At the very least, I don't want you to die before me. There is no reason to talk about this. Huang Man, did you hear that? If you dare to ask me to retrieve your corpse from the battlefield, you can forget about being my younger brother in your next life. Who doesn't have selfish motives?" Even Su Xiao said that according to reason, no one in the world has any relatives, and no one's son should die. But he can't do it either. It is the same for me. Su Fengnian said calmly, when the war starts, many people will die. Perhaps it will be second brother Yuan, Yan Wenluan, or even Lu Qiuer. But I still hope that we can die further north. Chapter 1201. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed. Who knows, maybe we can even take down Bei Meng in one go, right? Your brother, such a dissolute disciple, can become number one in the world. Even if he was only number one for a short period of time, he was still number one in the world. In the future, what difficulties will there be in the world? Su Longxiang turned his head and smiled foolishly. After the carriage had traveled a few li, Su Longxiang suddenly turned his head again. Then the youth blinked his eyes. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You want to ask me if I miss women? Of course I do. How could I not? I've always missed them. At first, I was worried about the forbidden meat given by the Wudong sect leader, so I could only endure it. When I couldn't endure it anymore, I had to endure it again. It was really miserable. In the end, I only found out later that I could eat meat. The only thing I have complaints about the sect leader is this. Old Zhenren, you should have said so earlier. But after returning from Bei Meng, one thing followed another. I can't care about it anymore. My thoughts aren't as heavy as before. I'll just leave it to fate. Huang Manor, let me ask you something. Between the two sisters-in-law, which one do you favor more? Su Longxiang smacked his lips and laughed mischievously. Su Fengnian immediately understood. It was the Lu family woman who knew how to make Chongyang cakes, and not the world-renowned female writer. Su Longxiang suddenly jumped off the carriage. He bent slightly and turned his head to look at Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian was stunned. He jumped onto Huang Manor's back. Su Longxiang shouted, "Fly!" Just like when he was a child. He carried his brother and ran wildly. This made Li Mo fans 1,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry dumbstruck. But almost all of them had the same idea. We'll go to the border to kill the enemy, just like Commander Su, leaving our backs to his older brother, the king of Beiliang, and just like the old soldiers of the Su family, the Beiliang cavalry can rest assured and leave their backs to great General Su Shao. This is the reason why the Beiliang cavalry is so powerful. This was something that was imprinted in his bones, and there was no reason to talk about it. Moreover, who said that the young king of Beiliang was not as good as the villain Chen Jibao? The bearded lieutenant turned his head to look at the young rider who had been grinning from ear to ear all the way. He urged his horse to come to Li Mofen's side and said softly, "General, I don't know what loyalty and righteousness are. Those are all words that scholars like to say, but I think—" Li Mofen interrupted his subordinate's words. He raised his horsewhip and pointed at the two brothers in front of him. He said in a low voice, "What, you want to show your loyalty? Well, the commander and the king are in front. Go tell them yourself. In any case, I don't like scholars like you, and I don't like people who use their mouths to fart. A few years ago, you were one of the people who said that they wanted to go home and buy a big house so that they could enjoy their wives." The lieutenant's skin was dark, and his face was not red. He pulled up the corners of his mouth and muttered, "At that time, I didn't have any confidence. Who would dare to put their lives in the hands of an unreliable leader? I, Chen Wu, am just a normal person." The lieutenant's voice became softer and softer. In the end, it was almost inaudible. Li Mofen did not look at this subordinate who had gone through fire and water with him for many years. He said calmly, "I don't care what happened in the past. Even if you deserted and went back to enjoy life, that is what you deserve. I, Old Li, will not look down on you. But in the future, don't even think about sitting at the same table as me, drinking and eating meat. I, Li Mofen, cannot afford to lose face." The lieutenant raised his head and laughed shamelessly. "General, your words are really hurtful. Chen Wu's little heart is thumping. It really hurts his heart and lungs. Without a few bowls of good wine, it really can't be cured." Li Mo Fan finally had a smile on his face as he muttered, "Mother Vastarus Kerr, having a soldier like you is already very embarrassing." Chen Wu said with a heartless and mischievous smile, "Isn't it because of you, General? You have no one to blame but yourself." Li Mofen shouted, "Fan Shilong, return to the camp and hang Chen Wu on the back of the horse." Chen Wu's eyes widened. He raised his voice and asked, "What?" Not far away, a lieutenant laughed and said, "Roger that." Chen Wu didn't dare to make irresponsible remarks to Deputy General Li Mofen. He turned his head and shouted at the bastard who was gloating. "Son of a bitch, Fan, your daughter can forget about marrying into my house. I'll be your mother's in-law." Fan Shilong didn't care. He rubbed his ears and said lazily, "Our daughter is so pretty, why worry about marriage? If your son didn't read a few books and made our daughter obsessed with him, she wouldn't marry anyone but him. Otherwise, even if you money grubber knelt in front of the door for 3 days and 3 nights, I wouldn't even give you half a word." The Longxiang army nearby roared with laughter. Qian Wu cursed in anger and said angrily, "Those who laughed will be hung on the back of the horse with me. Let's see whose bird is bigger. If it's bigger than mine, I'll hang it one more time." Some brave cavalry immediately laughed and said, "Lieutenant Qian, then we'll have to circle the camp many times." Qian Wu turned his head and said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "You bastards are good. When the time comes, pick the biggest bird. I'll chop it up and make it into a dish." There was a lot of howling. Li Mofen listened to the flirting between his subordinates and theirs. He wanted to keep a straight face, but he couldn't help but smile brightly. He didn't dare to say that all of the Bailiang frontier army could kill the northern barbarians until they cried for their parents, but the disciples of the Longxiang army under his command could casually take out 1,000 of his direct subordinates. Even if they faced 3,000 Baimang cavalry, it would still be child's play. That damn Liang imperial court, that bunch of officials from the 6 departments of Great Peace City to the prefectures and counties. How many years have they been saying that the Bailiang army is just an empty name? Li Mofen stopped smiling. His face was dark, and his eyes were burning. He said darkly, "This time the one who killed the most captains of the enemy, no one can take it from me." At the same time, the Wu family cavalry had entered River Province and was close to the Bailiang border. Chapter 1202. A shocking piece of news had swallowed up another piece of news that was already shocking. The latter was written by Deputy Administrator Song Dongming, who was called illegitimate outside of Bailiang. He submitted a memorial to Great Peace City, which shook the court of Liang. Su Fengnian, the king of Bailiang, actually requested to send troops to pacify Guangling Dao when Baimang's army was clearly pressuring the border. There were many people who speculated that Bailiang was finally going to rebel. Perhaps they had already received the personal promise of the Empress of Baimang. Pacifying Guangling Dao was just an excuse to invite the wolf into the house. The new king of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, had such evil intentions. But soon, another piece of news that had nothing to do with the political situation, but was even more interesting for the officials and the common people to chew on began to spread. It quickly spread all over the country, especially in the capital. The level of enthusiasm was no less than when Wang Xianji left Martial Emperor City, and when Qi Yonglong entered Great Peace City. The sword tomb of the Wu family, which had always been focused on swordsmanship, not only did someone openly leave the sacred place of death in the hearts of countless outstanding swordsmen for hundreds of years, but also sent out nearly 100 people in one go. The sword tomb of the Wu family was a place of death because if the swordsmen of the world wanted to truly make a name for themselves, they had to go through the Wu family and compete with the Wu family or their sword slaves. Only those who could walk out of the sword tomb with a famous sword from the sword tomb could be considered accomplished in swordsmanship. Even the previous leader of the Dongyue sword pool, Song Yanqing, lost to Wang Xianji in his youth and caused the reputation of the Dongyue sword pool to plummet. The real opportunity for the Dongyue sword pool to return to the pinnacle of the martial arts world was when Song Yanqing went to the sword tomb in his prime and returned safely. Even if he did not pull out a famous sword from the sword tomb, he still helped the Dongyue sword pool rise again. Although there were people close to the sword pool who often said that Song Yanqing's return meant that his swordsmanship was better than the Wu family's, most people only treated it as a joke. Song Yanqing had never said such words in the latter half of his life. The Wu family had been famous for 800 years and could be traced back to the Great Qin dynasty. After that, there were several great dynasties that sought to dominate the Central Plains. For example, the #1 swordsman from 600 years ago was the Wu family's sword crown, Wu Chong, who had dominated the martial arts world at the age of 31. The #1 swordsman at the founding of the Great Feng dynasty was still the leader of the Wu family, Wu He. It was rumored that on his deathbed, he laughed and said, "I've waited for 60 years, but there is still no sword in the world." It was enough to show his pride and confidence. Therefore, no one in the martial arts world could deny the fact that no matter how many swordsmen there were in the world, there were only 2 sword forests. One was the Wu family, and the other was for all swordsmen outside of the Wu family. There were sword geniuses who were famous in every generation of the martial arts world. Every 100 years, there would be countless new talents of the martial arts world and experts who believed that their swordsmanship was unparalleled in the martial arts world who would go to the Wu family to prove themselves. They wanted to prove that the Wu family's swordsmanship was inferior to the world's swordsmanship. However, except for a very small number of swordsmen who succeeded in their swordsmanship and retired, the vast majority would remain in the sword mound as slaves of the Wu family for the rest of their lives, practicing the legendary sitting sword technique and withered sword technique. After the Wu family set down this extremely unreasonable and harsh rule, only a few people left the sword mound, and all of them were top-notch swordsmen who had made a name for themselves when they returned to the martial arts world. As a result, the Wu family's sword mound was said to be a land of death for swordsmen. However, it was normal for the Wu family to become the holy land in the eyes of all the swordsmen in the world. The Wu family had passed down their legacies and collected their treasures. Their famous swords had already been piled up into mountains, and they had countless rare and unique sword manuals that had long been lost. If they could retrieve any sword or manual, not only would they be able to benefit from it for the rest of their lives, entering and exiting the sword mound was also a shortcut for a swordsman to climb to the top of the sword forest overnight. 200 years ago, the Wu family had defeated 10,000 cavalry with 9 swords, greatly damaging the vitality of the sword mound. Most importantly, it had forcefully severed many of their lineages, causing the Wu family to still be unable to fully recover. However, in the recent 100 years, 2 generations of swordsmen, Li Chungang, had gone to the Wu family's sword mound and obtained the wooden bull. Dong Tai had even come from the Wu family and was half a member of the Wu family. In the end, the truth could not be contained. Even though the imperial court and the local officials along the way wanted to suppress the news, the sensational truth of the Wu family's 100 cavalry and 100 swords leaving the sword mound still slowly began to surface. The news grew more and more intense. More and more well-informed people of the martial arts world began to count people, counting just which senior swordsmen had been unlucky enough to become slaves of the Wu family in the past 100 years and which swordsmen still had hope of being able to make it out of the sword mound this time. Along the way, the swords used by those swordsmen and the unique skills they had all became the most interesting topics of the imperial court. 6 years ago, Zhang Wantai had risen to fame in Liaodong and was known as the best left-handed swordsman in the world. He was an expert who had withstood 100 moves from the old Minister of War and the new pillar of the country, Gu Zhentang. After going to the sword mound of the Wu family, there had been no news of him. This time, he might be able to see the light of day again. 10 years ago, Lu Jianji, who had competed with Qi Jiajia for the title of the best swordsman in the capital, was definitely among them. 18 years ago, the famous young master of the apricot sword furnace in Gangnam-do, Yu Zhuawu, was also an important person who had gone to the sword mound to ask for swords but had disappeared without a trace. 27 years ago, Xie Gan, who had been nicknamed Han Banjian, after losing to the sword emperor of Shishu by only half a sword by a hair's breadth, was also very likely to go to Liangzhou with a sword on his back. More than 30 years ago, there was Cui Mei, who had the 2 reputations of Bodhisattva sword and sword monk. Before he shaved his head and became a monk, he was once a prodigy of the Cui family in Qinghe. More than 40 years ago, Gong Sun Xiushui, who came from a humble family in the southern Tang Empire, was not only the best swordsman in the southern Tang Empire, but also the best swordsman in the southern Tang Empire. Although he did not have a famous nickname, Gong Sun Xiushui's domineering swordsmanship was praised by many Jianghu veterans. This person's reason for going to the sword mound of the Wu family was also very interesting. I, Gong Sun Xiushui, was born at the wrong time. Since I could not see Li Chuangong's true face, I went to the place where Li Chungang had walked before. As a result, something happened and I could not leave the sword mound of the Wu family. At that time, the emperor of the southern Tang Empire had personally written a letter to the Wu family in a very respectful manner. Unexpectedly, the Wu family still did not pay any attention to this human emperor. Counting further back, there were naturally many famous swordsman talents. However, in today's Jianghu, there was no way for them to appear in the world alive. After all, those who were arrogant enough to go to the Wu family to ask for a sword were already quite old. Otherwise, they would not have dared to go to the Wu family. Even if they were 30 years old, they should be 70 or 70 years old now. Between Zhang Wantai and Gong Sun Xiushui, who were the most talked about, there were also 6 or 7 female swordsmen who were mentioned a lot. Perhaps their swordsmanship was not as good as these 2, Lu Jian, Xie En, and the others. However, before these female swordsmen entered the Wu family, which was as deep as the ocean, they were all favored in Jianghu. They were all once the young Jianghu men of every generation admired them for a long time. Who knew how many Jianghu men were willing to kneel under their skirts? Of the 6 or 7 women, the last one, the literary sword Nalan Huayu, who had unfortunately entered the Wu family's sword catacomb, was the most imaginative. After all, it was not too long ago, and she was a woman who had made it onto the rankings and won the Rouge rankings twice in a row. Even now, many of the Jianghu masters who had made a name for themselves would smile when they talked about this outstanding swordswoman. Then, they would smile to their juniors and say something about the same thing. Somewhere in Goddess Nalan's territory, there is a perfect combination of movement and stillness. The scenery is beautiful. If these martial arts masters had their wives by their side, most of them would glare resentfully. From the Wu family sword catacomb in the heart of the Central Plains to Beiliang, countless people raised their heads in anticipation, waiting bitterly, just to catch a glimpse of the 100 withered swordsmen of the sword catacomb gathered together. Even though the local government had received orders from the imperial court to prohibit officials of all ranks from participating, there were still many officials who took off their official robes and traveled on light carriages, choosing a good spot to quietly wait for the sight of the 100 riders crossing the border. However, many of the rumors were false, and the group of withered swordsmen naturally did not stop. The Wu family had dared to treat the emperors of previous dynasties coldly. Even in the peaceful Liang dynasty, when the emperor of the Zhao family invited the current head of the Wu family to leave the mountains and enter the capital, he was still treated with respect. This caused many people on the line to miss out on an opportunity, and they all beat their feet and stomped their chests, feeling regretful. If a normal person wanted to ride a carriage and ride a horse to catch up to this strangest group of riders in the world, it would be a fool's dream. Which of the 100 riders wasn't a top-notch expert in Jianghu? Even if a Jianghu expert could barely keep up, he would only dare to watch from afar, not dare to get close to disturb them. This was also the most breathtaking event in Jianghu. As long as one was in Jianghu, no matter if they were a true expert in their own province or someone who could beat someone with a brick and say they were a true Jianghu hero, everyone rushed like a flock of ducks. This was especially true for the young men and women who were new to the world. Those who had money would naturally spend a fortune to buy a famous steed with outstanding speed, or spend a large amount of money in exchange for accurate information, just to catch a glimpse of the withered swordsman. Those who were shy of money could only settle for the second best, and try their best to follow behind the backs of the Jianghu celebrities. However, there were indeed many lucky people who were fortunate enough to see this scene, and it would be unforgettable for the rest of their lives. Xianxia town, on the border of Beiliang's Yuzhou, was very lively. Many markets had opened at the last minute, and there was no place to sit in the restaurants and tea houses. The inns were even more packed. Many guests had racked their brains to come from Liangzhou and Lingzhou to join in on the fun, because there was exciting news from the neighboring Hezhou that the Wu family swordsmen were about to enter the border. As for which province or county, and who would be lucky enough to encounter them, everyone would have to depend on their own luck. Chapter 1203. In an unknown inn in Yunxia town, there was a young man and woman who looked like a master and servant. The man's appearance could be considered decent, but he didn't look like a child of a rich family. Otherwise, the servant girl wouldn't be blind with her eyes closed. She also didn't have any good looks, but she carried a sword on her back. It was probably a piece of junk that was casually made by a shoddy blacksmith and wasn't worth much money. The inn, from the shopkeeper to the waiters, didn't even look at them. They were all busy staring at those rich young masters and young ladies. These people with a bit of power and influence were the only ones who could afford to spend money. If it weren't for the group of old men from the Wu family's sword tomb, who would be willing to stay in this and that didn't have anything to show? If it weren't for the young man's persuasion, the shopkeeper would have already kicked the master and servant out of the inn after paying the deposit. There were only a dozen or so rooms in the inn. Including the side rooms that were hurriedly cleaned up, there were less than 20 rooms. It was a matter of who would stay in the inn. The shopkeeper was kind and in the end, he endured the heartache and didn't kick the 2 poor fellows out of the inn. However, he wasn't willing to look at them. Every time he looked at them, it was like watching a few taels of silver slip away from his hands. It was too infuriating. Today, the young master and servant pair had already occupied the table by the window on the first floor of the inn. To put it bluntly, they were trash that occupied the toilet but didn't want to take a dump. They also didn't order any wine and only ordered hot tea that cost the least. The waiter's face was cold as he slammed the plate of food that came with the tea onto the table. His voice was not soft as he muttered to himself, "Tea, it's tea every day. Our inn's guests who drink tea every day and don't drink wine are really unique." The young man in green robes pretended to be stupid and laughed. The servant girl with the broken sword on her back was probably blind and deaf. In any case, she was indifferent to anything that was said. After the waiter walked far away and went to a table of rich guests to serve them as if they were his ancestors, the young outsider curled his lips. After seeing so many people, I feel that when bushing is the most suitable. Sigh, I really don't understand this world. The woman sitting quietly across from him didn't say a word. If a woman with outstanding beauty was so demure, she could be seen as a lotus flower by men. Unfortunately, her appearance was ordinary, and in the eyes of others, she could only be seen as rigid and boring. The young man who shared the same table with her did not seem to find the woman in front of him boring. He said to himself, "Cui Hua, after we left home, we walked from the north to the south, and then from the southeast to the northwest. We have walked for more than 10,000 miles, but I have been eating that jar of pickled vegetables that you pickled every day. I really want to change my taste a little bit. Really, I just have that little thought." The woman with the vulgar name suggested in all seriousness, "How about we make some pickled cabbage and pepper?" The young man said bitterly, "Isn't that still pickled cabbage? But I can't eat spicy food." The woman thought carefully for a moment and asked, "Stewed meat with pickled vegetables?" The young man swallowed his saliva and said awkwardly, "It's good, but we can't afford meat." The woman gave a faint "oh," and didn't say anything else. This wasn't a problem that she wanted to think about, so she didn't think about it. She had always been like this. The young man didn't continue to dwell on this problem. It was a habit that had become second nature. In fact, he didn't get tired of eating pickled vegetables. It was just that she didn't like to talk. He just wanted to find an excuse for her to talk to him. Wu Lu Ding felt that he would never get tired of eating pickled vegetables in his life. From the first day he saw her and ate her pickled vegetables, he never doubted this. After all, the pickled vegetables she pickled at that time weren't bad, but they were really hard to swallow. But after that, day after day, year after year, for more than 10 years, her culinary skills became better and better, and she became more and more skilled. In the eyes of Wu Lu Ding, the current sword crown of the Wu family's sword tomb, there was nothing in the world that made him happier than this. Practicing the sword and being determined to become the best swordsman in the world was something that his family and parents wanted him to do. Since it was a responsibility that he had to bear, he didn't avoid it and worked very hard. But he liked to eat pickled vegetables, and that was his choice. These two things were not important or important. Sipping tea, Wu Lu Ding asked, "Cui Hua, can we really meet our family's uncles and aunts here?" Cui Hua gently nodded. Wu Lu Ding counted on his fingers and said to himself, "Brother Zhang always likes to brag. This time, when we see him, we must stay far away from him. Otherwise, when he starts to nag, his spittle will fly everywhere. Uncle Yu always wants to steal the second half of the Dark North sword art from me. We don't pay attention to him, so as to avoid him completely going crazy. Aunt Naylin always liked to put her chest on my head when I was young. She also lied to me that it was because she was tired from walking. She was really heavy. Before we left home, she told me to look for a wife based on her appearance. Although I didn't have this idea, the two of us have walked for so long, and we really haven't met many who are better looking than Aunt Naylin. Of course, there are a few who have the same weight as her chest, but their figures are worlds apart from her." Cui Hua glanced at Wu Lu Ding. "There's sword energy. It's over, I probably won't be able to eat pickled vegetables for half a month." Wu Lu Ding coughed and quickly changed the topic. "There's also that Uncle Xia and Baldy Cui. They're not decent people either. One wants to recognize you as his daughter, and the other clearly doesn't like to eat pickled vegetables. Every time, they find a way to steal a few jars from you. Cui Hua, let's stay away from them." Wu Lu Ding counted them one by one. "When it comes to our neighbors, Zhou Lianqi and Xie Chengan, I get angry. One has a strong evil spirit and wants to kill everyone in the world with a sword. The other seems to think that everyone in the world owes him millions of silver. I wonder why these two guys don't just kill each other. However, Aunt Chu and Grandpa Gong's son are both really good people. Just like you, they don't like to talk much. That Hellion sword maniac, who I gave the nickname of Grandpa Sword Marriage, is neither a good person nor a bad person. I once asked the old ancestor about his origin, but the old ancestor didn't say. However, he should be a master who is hard to find in our family. The old ancestor's swordsmanship is only slightly better than him. As for talking about swordsmanship, The old ancestor is inferior to him. Anyway, my grandmother once said that the old man's understanding of swordsmanship, although I don't really understand it, should be able to surpass the current generation by 100 years. As for that demon with the surname Zhu, if it wasn't for his powerful swordsmanship, I wouldn't be willing to talk about him. I really don't know how such a treacherous person who is only in his early 40s could cultivate such a profound swordsmanship. It can make the old ancestor hate him but have to praise his swordsmanship. Wu Luding chattered and talked to himself. He quickly finished a pot of tea and shouted for the waiter to add hot water to the teapot. The waiter heard him but pretended not to hear. He leaned against the pillar and slacked off. His eyes were almost hanging on the chest of a young woman. Wu Luding could only give up after shouting twice. He looked at Sui Hua and couldn't help but ask, "Tell me, releasing so many people this time, even granting amnesty to a demon like Demon Zhu and allowing them to fight for their lives at the border of Beiliang in exchange for a chance to completely leave the Wu family. Is the old ancestor's way of doing things right or wrong?" Sui Hua was expressionless and didn't move. Wu Luding sighed and asked another question. "Sui Hua, do you think these 100 or so swordsmen together can compare to the strength of the 9 old ancestors of the Wu family 200 years ago?" Sui Hua finally opened her mouth to speak. 1 sword plus 1 sword doesn't equal the power of 2 swords. It's already amazing to have 1.5 swords. The 9 swords of the Wu family ancestors who rushed to Bei Mang at the great cost of having half of the people fall into certain death before the battle even started. Only then did they construct the sword formation recorded in an unknown ancient record. Its power was unparalleled. Even if the current world is led by the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, Wang Xianji's eldest disciple Groom Yu, Taiyan City's Qi Jiaj, Tangxi sword Saint Lu Baijia, and Longhu Mountain's Qi Xianxia, it's a total of 9 people. Even if their realms are much higher than the 9 ancestors of the Wu family, in terms of killing power against tens of thousands of cavalry, they may not be much higher. Chapter 1204. Wu Luding actually didn't take it to heart, but he was pleasantly surprised to hear Cui Hua say this in one breath. Cui Hua had obviously seen through his thoughts, and very quickly went back to her silent meditation. Wu Luding sighed, and rubbed the stubble on his chin with the palm of his hand. "Don't talk about the number 1 swordsman in the world. I'm afraid I can't even be considered in the top 5 right now. Even the top 10 is a bit uncertain. But the old ancestor has made such a big move. I'm too embarrassed to drag you up there. Cui Hua, I'm very depressed right now." The last sentence was something that Wen Bushing, who shamelessly freeloaded on food and drinks in the small house in Great Peace City, often said often. In fact, Wu Luding missed the word crotch, but after Wu Luding followed suit, he couldn't eat pickled vegetables for 2 to 3 months. From then on, he only dared to say now and not crotch. Cui Hua didn't want to talk, and Wu Luding also felt indescribably sad. For a moment, he, the sword crown of the Wu family without a sword, and the female sword attendant, who was carrying the Su of Gojoseon on the other side of the table, both became silent. There were about 10 tables on the first floor, and they were all dressed in bright clothes and looked very rich. It was said that Beiliang was poor, but just like other places in Liang, there were actually quite a few rich people. The guests of these inns were all talking loudly without stopping until they shocked people to death, or they were pretending to be experts and talking nonsense. It wasn't that so-and-so beside them had once known so-and-so, and that so-and-so behind them was a great swordsman who had successfully entered the sword catacomb and retreated. It was just that their words were noisy, and everyone agreed with each other. There were also many people who were startled. In fact, everyone was well aware that if someone really knew a top Jianghu swordsman, who would be willing to stay and drink in this kind of inn? Even more so, no one would have thought that not far away, there was the sword crown of the Wu family, whose name had already shaken the north and south of the river, as well as the female sword attendant, who carried the second most famous sword in the world on her back and understood Li Chuangong's 2-sleeve green snake. Even if Wu Luding announced his identity and background, no one would be willing to believe him, nor would they dare to believe him. In the eyes of everyone present, if you were really Wu Luding, you wouldn't have the face to come out and mingle in Jianghu without more than a dozen experts to serve you tea, give you water, massage your shoulders, and massage your back. How could you even boast that you were the one and only sword crown in the world? Therefore it must be fake. About 2 hours later, the entire Xianxia town was in an uproar. The 100 cavalry from the Wu family's sword tomb really passed by here. Cui Hua stood up and reached out to her back, gently pressing down on the Su of Gojoseon ancient sword. Originally, the Wu family cavalry was going to circle around the city according to the rules, But under the leadership of a leader surnamed Wu, they changed their minds at the last moment and made an exception to pass through the city. 100 riders entered the streets of Xianxia town. Only the sound of hooves could be heard. There was no noise at all. Every one of them had the same haggard look on their faces. The oldest had a head full of snow, and the youngest was a man and woman in their 40s. Everyone had a sword on their back, but only one sword. Without exception, no one had a sword on their back, nor did they have a sword sheath to hide it. If you break into my Wu family, your skills are not as good as mine, and you will be my Wu family's sword slave for the rest of your life. This was the rule set by Wu Tsong, who became the strongest person in the world at the age of 31. The Wu family's rule, for hundreds of years, had become the rule of all swordsmen in the world. In the shops on both sides of the main street of Xianxia town, no one dared to walk on the street. They only dared to stick their heads out of the windows and doors. Their eyes were full of surprise and awe, and almost everyone's forehead and palms were sweaty. The shop assistant didn't even have the time to look at the rich girl's full breasts and graceful figure. He didn't have the ability or status to squeeze to the door, so he could only move a chair inside the door and stand on it to watch. But this wasn't the most exaggerated. The most exaggerated were the people who nimbly climbed onto the trees and roofs. When they saw the Wu family's cavalry pass right under their noses, some were shocked by the name of the Wu family's sword tomb, and some were cheering because they were rushing to Beiyang to help. But even more were stunned and didn't know what to do. When the group of one man, one sword, and one horse stopped for no reason in front of the inconspicuous inn, the people at the entrance were so frightened that they retreated in panic. Many of them fell to the ground and scrambled back into the inn with their hands and feet. As a result, Wu Luding and sword servant Cui Hua finally made way. When the shopkeeper and the shop assistant saw the second and third riders of the Wu family dismount and make way for the young master and servant, their minds were filled with paste and they were completely scared silly. The shop assistant who had been giving the master and servant a hard time these past few days fell to the ground with a stench of urine all over his body. Wu Luding sat on the horse that one of the Wu family's sword servants, Helian, dismounted and made way for him, while Cui Hua sat on the horse of an old woman that had been forgotten by Jianghu for many years. The two sword servants didn't have the slightest bit of resentment. As the group of horses continued to move forward, they silently followed beside the two riders. This was the rule of the Wu family. No matter what kind of strength or reputation you had before you entered the Wu family's sword tomb, your sword was inferior to mine. Even if you could wield a sword again in this life, it was up to the Wu family to decide. When the middle-aged man in the lead saw Wu Luding and Cui Hua, he didn't say a word. He turned his horse around and returned to the Wu family alone. Wu Luding turned his head and looked at the lonely back of his uncle, Wu Xian. He bit his lips and slowly turned his head, but also didn't say a word. The younger generation of the Wu family didn't care about children. They were only allowed to use the sword. Every generation, one sword crown would travel the Jianghu. If they didn't come out, they would be the best in the way of the sword. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to return to the Wu family when they were alive, and they wouldn't be buried in the Wu family after they died. This was the rule set by another ancestor, Wu He. Ever since the Wu family's 9 swords defeated 10,000 riders, in the past 200 years, almost every Wu family disciple who had the qualifications to have one of the 9 words in their name were all outstanding sword embryos who had displayed astonishing talent since childhood. However, other than the 9 words that had never been used, none of the other 8 words were left out. But strangely, other than Wu Luding who had the 6 words in his name, Wu Xian, who had been defeated by Wu Su who later became the king of Beiyang's concubine. Thus, the sword that should have been known by the world was destined to be unknown for the rest of its life, just like its owner. And this time, the Wu family's sword tomb had sent out more than 100 riders. They also wanted him, the nephew who had replaced the Wu family's sword-seeking Jianghu, to be the only person in charge. No matter how outstanding Wu Xian's sword skills were, he could only be a flash in the pan of Jianghu and die of old age in the family. The Wu family was not only ruthless to those who broke into the sword tomb, but even more ruthless to their own family members. In the past 200 years, countless Wu family disciples had only wanted to take a look at Jianghu, but they had died under the swords of their fathers. Countless men and women had quietly committed suicide. Even more so, countless people had gone mad because of practicing the sword and had been insane for the rest of their lives. Wu Luding was very glad that he had been born in the Wu family, where he had lived and died for the sword. He had never complained, but he was even more glad that he had Cui Hua to accompany him on this trip to Jianghu. A Jianghu without cui hua and pickled cabbage could not be considered Jianghu. Just like a certain idiot who, in the end, still believed that as long as his brother Xianyan was still in Jianghu, he would still be in Jianghu. Wu Luding had always only recognized that idiot as his friend. He did not even give a damn about his royal highness. When he became the king of Beiliang and became the most powerful person in the world, he, Wu Luding, did not think much of it. This time, Wu Luding came to Beiliang because he wanted to ask in person. Su, do you still remember the ranger who only carried a wooden sword in his life? If you dare to forget. Yes, you Su Fengnian are powerful. Even Wang Xianji is not your opponent. I, Wu Luding, do not have the ability to chop you to death, but I can still take hundreds of riders and leave Beiliang on my own. However, as he was thinking about this matter, Wu Luding felt somewhat helpless as he rode through Xianxia town. Even if he had the sword crown, he most likely would not be able to take away these Wu family sword slaves. In the world, other than his own ancestor, no one else had the ability to do so. Not long after, at the border between Yu and Liang prefectures, there was a roadside wine shop at a fork in the road. The middle-aged lady boss used to be glared at by the greedy customers who passed by. This time, the situation had changed. She was the one who glared fiercely at the extraordinarily handsome young man. He sat there alone and ordered a jug of wine, but he asked for 2 cups. She said that she did not have wine cups. Her shop used big bowls. He smiled and said that bowls were fine too. The woman leaned on the table next to him and looked at the handsome man who was in a daze. She thought that he had probably remembered someone he wanted to drink with. Chapter 1205. The wine shop's business was getting better and better, and several tables were filled with customers. This made the proprietress smile from ear to ear. This was a rare sight in the past. As she shouted and served the wine and meat, she calculated in her heart that she had earned a few pieces of silver and a few copper coins today. She thought about her youngest child, who was studying in a private school, who was always clamoring to buy brushes and ink. How could the family afford this expense? Otherwise, which decent woman would be willing to show her face in public? Most would rather face the yellow earth and back to the sky. Now, she could finally fulfill that child's wish. The tables were full, but there were still people behind her asking for wine. Moreover, they had no intention of leaving immediately. The proprietress had no choice but to bring out a few stools. Fortunately, the men did not think it was unsightly and only cared about drinking and eating. If it were in the past, the men who settled down in the tavern would often look at the proprietress and tease her. Beiliang women were bold and unyielding, not inferior to men. As long as the men did not go overboard and pinched them when they delivered the wine, the proprietress would not get angry. However, today, the customers all glanced to the east of the post road as if they were waiting for someone. Not long after, more than 20 people had gathered in the tavern. As a result, the handsome young man who occupied a table was particularly eye-catching. In the beginning, no one wanted to share a table and drink, but for some reason, after seeing the young man's appearance and temperament, they all subconsciously avoided him. Now the proprietress saw that more and more customers were coming, and there were even more rich people dressed in silk. She was a bit worried about the young man. What kind of place was Beiliang? In other places, there was a saying that a disagreement would lead to a fight. Here, everyone had a violent temper that was like knives and sand. Perhaps one more glance would lead to a fight. The proprietress did not care that the young man made her lose a few pots of wine and a few pounds of meat, but she was afraid that he would get into trouble and suffer a loss. She would not be able to bear it if such a handsome young man was beaten black and blue. Just as the proprietress was about to squeeze out a smile and speak to the young man, she never thought that what she was afraid of would happen. A group of tall and sturdy men with sabers at their waists had set their eyes on the table with 3 empty seats. The proprietress was truly afraid that the young man did not know the dangers of the Jianghu. She was afraid that he would feel that he had lost face and would open his mouth to hurt her. At that time, sabers and swords had no eyes. So what if he had some family background to rely on? After so many years in Beiliang, when had there not been a year where she had not heard of a few scholars being beaten half to death? In Beiliang, unlike other places in Liang, it was not easy to wear scholarly robes. Only a young man with a cold saber could intimidate the people of the Jianghu. However, the proprietress had also heard that it seemed that the young king of Beiliang had issued an imperial edict. Nowadays, even the children of generals did not dare to privately wear cold sabers. It was even very rare to see someone riding a horse in the downtown area. The proprietress did not understand what it meant to worry about the country and the people. She only felt that the world in Bailiang was indeed better. The proprietress heaved a sigh of relief because although the young man looked young, he had a lot of Jianghu experience. He took the initiative to chat with the fierce-looking men for a while, and then smiled and asked for 10 catties of green ant wine from her. The 5 middle-aged men who did not look like they were in the business of making a living saw that the young man was tactful and had a few more smiles on their faces. Outside of Bailiang, as long as they were not the descendants of generals, not everyone would dare to draw their sabers and start a fight within Bailiang. Moreover, the descendants of generals were also divided into 3, 6, and 9 ranks. The height of their father's official hat and the number of soldiers they commanded determined whether they could act tyrannically within a county or a province. For the people of Bailiang's Jianghu, almost every one of them had suffered at the hands of the descendants of generals. Often, there would even be people who would be targeted for no reason and would find a lame excuse to kill them. Afterwards, when they reported to the authorities, it would be nothing more than a sentence of small fry using their skills to commit murder. As the descendants of the generals of the Bailiang cavalry, how could we bring shame to our family's reputation? We would naturally lend a helping hand when we see injustice on the road. When the officials forced the people to rebel, the people had no choice but to rebel. However, if they rebelled, they would die. Back then, in the 3 provinces of Bailiang under the rule of butchers, other than the Wudong Mountain, where the immortals and immortals cultivated, which was still considered a famous sect in the martial arts world, no one else could claim to be a big sect in Jianghu. Wasn't the reason why this was the case because they were all harmed by the numerous descendants of generals? Those Jianghu masters who were truly skilled in martial arts were all hired as watchdogs, and in turn, helped the evildoers to suppress the wanderers of Jianghu who did not have any backing. In Yuzhou, there was the Sun family who came from the same hometown as the spear fairy Wuxia. The children in the family were all proficient in the spear, but because they were unwilling to rely on the authorities and the descendants of generals, when the head of the family died, they were quickly exterminated by the enemies of a general. It was said that out of the family of more than 40 people, only 2 or 3 managed to escape. The proprietress, who had seen many customers coming and going, would occasionally think that it was not easy for people like her to make money by selling wine. Those who were in Jianghu usually looked heroic, but in fact, it was probably even harder for them. Looking in the direction of Yuzhou in the east, she saw a cloud of dust at the end of the post-house road. The proprietress only glanced at it slightly. There were often cavalrymen of Bailiang passing by on the post-house road, and she had already figured out the trick. It seemed that there were only about 100 of them, which was really nothing in Bailiang, which was rich in iron cavalry and big horses. The proprietress saw that everyone inside and outside the tavern, regardless of whether they were sitting on chairs or stools, stood up as if their butts were on fire. Their eyes were blazing with passion, and they were even more fascinated than when they saw a naked woman. This made the proprietress somewhat puzzled. Could it be that some big shot had graced them with his presence? She was just a rural woman who could only afford to sell green ant wine. Whether it was in Jianghu or in the imperial court, there were many things that she did not take to heart even if she heard about them. As a woman who was content with counting a small pile of copper coins every day, how could she worry about the great cause of the country for the king of Bailiang? During this period of time, she had heard many customers talk about the Wu family's sword tomb, but she did not take it seriously. She stared fiercely at all the customers who left their seats, afraid that they would take the opportunity to run away with the money for the wine. After being busy for half a day, the proprietress could finally take a breather. She was in the mood to look at the young man who had ordered a lot of green ant wine. She pursed her lips and smiled. Who said that only men were allowed to look at beauties? Women also like to look at handsome men. At this moment, the young man also stood up and stood under the shade of the big locust tree next to the tavern table by the courier road. His hands covered the cuffs of his sleeves. She looked at his side profile and envied him for having a pair of attractive eyes. Moreover, when he looked at her, he did not have the look of an ordinary man who wanted to eat her alive. His eyes were clean, just like the old well in the village. The water from the well was exceptionally clear all year round. It was good to drink a ladle of it to quench one's thirst or use it to make wine. The proprietress could not help but laugh out loud as she thought about it. She wondered which family's young woman was so lucky to be stared at by such a handsome young man every day. If it were her, she would be willing to eat less and save money to buy rouge and powder that she had never used to apply on her face. The proprietress was right. There were indeed 100 riders coming from here to Liangzhou. However, even a woman like her who did not know what Jianghu was, could see that the 100 riders were not ordinary. The riders were all people who used swords. They were not armored and carried crossbows like the cavalry of Bailiang, nor were they dressed in bright clothes like the retainers of important people. Everyone's face was as hard as stone. Many of the swordsmen looked to be in their 70s, but when they rode by, their waists were like erect military spears. Their spirit was not something that the old people in the village could have. Especially when the 100 riders looked at the tavern almost at the same time. Not only did the proprietress retreat in fear, but almost everyone else also retreated. However, for some reason, the more than 100 swordsmen did not stop after the leading rider urged his horse forward without looking sideways. The proprietress was relieved. It was good that they did not stop. Otherwise, she would not dare to charge them for the wine. The young vassal king, who was deliberately ignored by the 100 riders of the Wu family, put down his arm. In the end, he did not say anything. It was inevitable that he felt a little embarrassed. Of course, Su Fengnian knew more than anyone else present. Wu Luding, who was in the lead, intentionally turned a blind eye to Su Fengnian, and the sword slaves behind him could only continue forward with sword crown. Su Fengnian did not get angry. He sat down and asked the proprietress for half a caddy of green ant wine. Anyway, he had shown his sincerity. It did not matter if the leader of the 100 riders of the Wu family did not appreciate it, but he could not put his hot face on a cold butt, right? If it were not for the sake of the Wu family's great-grandfather, whom he had just met, he would not have waited at the border of Liangzhou. Since Wu Luding wanted to put on airs, then let him. Su Fengnian would not make things difficult for him. Su Fengnian calmly drank the wine. In his mind, he was weighing the strength of the 100 riders of the Wu family. Wu Luding and the 6 or 7 people behind the second rider, Cui Hua, could all be considered top-notch experts. If the battle was in a stalemate, and victory or defeat was only a hair's breadth away, who could stop these 100 riders and 100 swordsmen? There was no need to consider Tuoba. As long as the martial god of Bei Mang was on the battlefield, he did not need anyone to protect him. Hong Jingyan should be able to handle it, and Murong Baoding would probably not be able to handle it. However, in a battle between two armies, the legend of taking the head of a general in the midst of an army of 10,000 was very rare in the spring and autumn period. Especially with the appearance of several types of large crossbows that were easy to assemble and astonishingly powerful, it was very difficult for someone to achieve the feat of breaking through a battle formation or even entering and exiting a few times. It should be known that a fish-duck treading crossbow, which was made by the joint efforts of several elite soldiers, was so powerful that it was known as the 50 flying swords in Jianghu. That was because within the range of 500 feet before the fish-duck treading crossbow's power had decreased, a single fish-duck treading crossbow was equivalent to a flying sword of a sword immortal. It was difficult to dodge, let alone face it head-on. If Wang Xianji had not broken Gao Shulu's physique. Su Fengnian thought of this and laughed at himself. There were no ifs in the world. Chapter 1206. Su Fengnian let out a sigh of relief. The people who had come to try their luck at the tavern had all come in high spirits after feasting their eyes. Many of them had even paid extra for the wine to the waitress when they were paying the bill. Soon, the tavern was completely emptied. Before those burly men with swords left, they didn't forget to bid farewell to Su Fengnian, who was treating them to wine. Su Fengnian continued to sit and drink his wine. Although he occasionally chatted with the woman about the harvest, he naturally didn't have any improper thoughts about the lady boss. The charming woman wasn't naive enough to think that this young man had any wild thoughts. She took advantage of the conversation. Since she didn't have any business to serve, she sat across the table from him. She carried a jar of green ant wine and a few plates of homemade dishes to go with the wine. She said that it was for him, but it didn't cost much. As the two of them chatted, 3 more guests finally arrived. 1 old man and 2 young men, all of them carrying bags and carrying wooden poles. They sat down at the table next to Su Fengnian's. They weren't from rich families. The old man only asked for half a caddy of green ant wine. The 2 young men could only smell the fragrance of the wine and watch the elder in their family drink with narrowed eyes. A burly young man with stubble on his chin asked in a low voice, "Grandpa, the swordsmen we saw just now, were they really the swordsmen from the Wu family sword tomb?" The old man nodded. The other young man with delicate features didn't look vulgar. His lips were red and his teeth were white. He looked like a woman. If he had met those young men who liked men a few years ago, he would have been better off dead. Fortunately, There were still many arrogant young men in the prisons of Baelyong. Compared to the Baelyong of the past, the Baelyong was much more disciplined. Moreover, many rich people had moved out of Baelyong. Today, with the addition of Lu Province's Baelyong, it was a rare peaceful world. After the lady boss greeted the three cash-strapped guests, she returned to her seat. She glanced at the delicate young man and subconsciously turned her head to look at the young man across the table. Yes, the young man in front of her was much more handsome. She didn't expect to be caught red-handed by the young man. The lady boss saw that he seemed a little helpless. She couldn't help but laugh. There was nothing to be embarrassed about. After all, she was a woman who would soon have a daughter-in-law. Her skin couldn't be that thin. The lady boss laughed straightforwardly. Young master, you look even better than the prettiest girl in our village. Your parents must be good-looking as well. Young master, please don't be angry if I look at you a few more times. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Lady boss, if you want to look, then look. I can't control your eyes. But can you omit the small change when you pay the bill later? The lady boss laughed and said, How can I do that? I've already given you a jar of the best green ant wine. Later on, you can't miss a single copper coin. If young master can let me touch and pinch you a few times, I can consider it. Su Fengnian said helplessly, Lady boss, your business is really profitable. The lady boss laughed heartily without hiding anything. Su Fengnian looked at her smiling face and laughed as well. Compared to the women who grew up in the misty rain in Jiangnan, the women of the northwest frontier fortress were naturally less gentle and graceful. However, they had more of a heroic spirit that could only be cultivated in this place. Su Fengnian liked the lady boss's smile. It was just like how he liked Baelyong. For Su Fengnian, who grew up in Baelyong Liaodong, where his ancestral home was, could never be called home. The handsome young man next door listened to the conversation between Su Fengnian and the lady boss and furrowed his brows. The tall young man sneaked a glance at the lady boss's chest that had bumped against the edge of the table and swallowed. The old man sitting next to Su Fengnian had a calm expression. He held a wine bowl and closed his eyes to smell the wine before each sip. If one looked closely, the old man and the two young men had thick calluses between their thumb and forefinger. It was clear that they had touched many things. Su Fengnian had seen it long ago, but he didn't want to look into it. The poor practiced literature and the rich practiced martial arts. These three were clearly people who practiced the spear all year round. As for why they were so shabby, even the spear shafts they used to practice the shaking of the spear were the most coarse pewter ones. Who didn't have a difficult book that they didn't want to open? The handsome young man lowered his voice and gritted his teeth. Grandpa, I heard that the Sun family moved to the Central Plains. The devil surnamed he must have followed them. What should we do? The old man's eyes were complicated. He lowered his head and drank a mouthful of wine. He raised his head and said indifferently, Practice your spear skills first. Even if he stands in front of you now and you too stab him 100 times, you won't be able to hurt him. The young man was stunned and tears welled up in his eyes. The strong young man whispered, Why did I hear that he joined the fish dragon gang? He even became a leader. Compared to the Sun family, he is even more difficult to deal with. The old man glared at him and the strong young man immediately shut up. The handsome young man's eyes lit up and the old man immediately said in a deep voice, Whether you go to the Central Plains or the Fish Dragon Gang, the most important thing for you is to practice your spear skills. As long as Grandpa is still alive, I will expel you from the family if you dare to seek revenge on him. The tall young man whispered, A month with a rod, a year with a saber, and a lifetime with a spear. With my talent, I won't be able to master the spear even in 10 lifetimes. The old man slammed his wine bowl and said angrily, Nonsense! Wuxia practiced the spear for less than 40 years and was already one of the 4 grandmasters who was as famous as old sword god Li. A year with a saber? Gu Jiantang practiced for only a year and became the best saber user in the world? Our lord who succeeded Wang Xianxia and became the best in the world. Speaking of this, the old man was suddenly speechless because he suddenly realized that the young lord didn't seem to have practiced the saber for many years. The tall young man snickered. Even the handsome young man was amused and the dense haze on his face faded a little. The old man shook his head and continued to drink. Grandpa, our cold saber, the curved saber of the northern barbarians, and the waist saber of the king of Yan's army in Nanjiang are known as the 3 famous sabers in the world. Can you tell me more about them? Practice your spear. No matter how good the saber is, it belongs to others. Even if you only have a wooden spear, it is still in your hands. The tall young man was very curious and full of dreams about the Jianghu of the Central Plains. He felt wronged and said, "I won't lose anything by talking about it." The other young man from the north and the south was more well-behaved. He only asked, "Grandpa, last time you said that our Baelyong army's spear technique is not suitable. Why is that?" The tall young man laughed and said, "Grandpa is just bragging. Our Baelyong army has Su Yambing and Han Lao's Han, the two immortal spear juniors. How can it be our grandpa's turn to make irresponsible remarks?" The handsome young man said angrily, "What's wrong with our grandpa?" Wu Jinling, who was more powerful than Wuxia, even asked our grandpa about how to hold the spear when he just started practicing the spear. The tall young man made a face and said, "God knows if grandpa is just bragging." The old man didn't get angry. He drank and fell into deep thought. Finally he came back to his senses and sighed softly. Let's not talk about Wu Jinling, who was considered the most talented in Baelyong back then. The immortal spear Wuxia, Su Yambing, and Han Lao's Han, the three juniors, in terms of spear technique, Grandpa was much weaker than them when he was young. In the future, the gap will only get bigger and bigger. There is nothing to be embarrassed about. However, you have to remember one thing. No matter what weapon is in the world, it is for people to use. Experts have their own way of using it, and ordinary martial artists have their own way of practicing it. Take Wu Jinling for example. He entered the martial grade at the age of 9, the second grade at the age of 12, and the Vajra at the age of 17. In his hands, the spear seemed to have been bestowed with supernatural powers. Even so, when he was 14, he still encountered a threshold. It was also at that time that Grandpa casually said a few words about how to hold the spear. After that, Wu Jinling was enlightened and started practicing the spear again. Unfortunately, the heavens are jealous of geniuses. Su Fengnian, who had been listening by the side, smiled and said, "Wu Jinling's early death isn't necessarily because the heavens are jealous of geniuses. On the path of martial arts, it is not a good thing to be too smooth. In the Jianghu, there is a saying that there are mortal enemies. Often, two people who are at odds with each other can steadily climb up the martial arts realm. No matter how fast they are always advancing. It is probably because of the whetstone. If the immortal spear Wuxia didn't go to Bei Mang, he might not have become a grandmaster in the future. Moreover, I have also heard that in martial arts, it is taboo to be the head of a chicken rather than the tail of a phoenix. When practicing the saber, the sword, or the spear, after reaching a certain realm, there is no need to talk about the top 3 swordsmanship or the #1 saber user in the world. Everyone is aiming to be the #1 in the Jianghu. Otherwise, when Wang Xianji was in the martial emperor city for 60 years, there wouldn't be so many people who went to humiliate themselves. The old man smiled and didn't say anything. As long as it was a martial arts aristocratic family, there would be no elders who wouldn't speak of such things. In the old man's opinion, even 100 of those famous teachers with undeserved reputation could not compare to a wise teacher. Moreover, at the old man's age, no matter how much ambition he had when he was young, it had long been worn away by the passing of years. Especially when he heard about the illusory #1 or #2 in the world, he was even less interested. However, out of courtesy, the old man still faced the arrogant young man and raised the wine bowl in his hand as a toast. The young man also raised his bowl and drank the wine in one gulp. The tall young man was a fearless newborn calf. When he saw that this young man had even heard of Wu Jinling, he was puzzled. After all, although Wu Jinling had been mentioned as often as spear immortal Wuxia in their hometown, few people in other parts of the northern Liang knew of this name because he had died at a young age and died in a disgraceful way of getting drunk on the streets. Moreover, it had been decades since then. The young man couldn't help but ask, "How do you know about Wu Jinling?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I heard it from a friend." The delicate young man was disgusted when he saw this guy flirting with the lady boss. He turned his head and stared blankly at the post house. Chapter 1207. Su Fengnian glanced at the 3 white ash rods of different lengths and suddenly said casually, "Old mister, of the 2 juniors, one should have changed his rod half a year ago. It should have been 3 inches longer, and the other one should have increased his weight by 6 ounces. The 2 youths were confused. The old man's eyes lit up, but quickly dimmed. He honestly said, "I don't have money." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "A single coin stumps a hero. Old mister, I still have some money left for wine. Would you like to drink another 2 caddies of wine? Of course, the woman was happy for the customer to drink a few more bowls of wine, especially the handsome young man in front of her. Without waiting for the old man to answer, she eagerly went to pick up the wine. This gave the old man a way out. He probably believed that his vision, honed from years of wandering, trusted this young stranger. He cupped his fists and smiled. Then this old man thanks you. Although the old man had gone through a lot, he still had a forthright temperament. He asked the tall young man to sit on a bench and invited Su Fengnian to sit on the seat beside him. The lady boss added some wine and meat. The plate was not big, but the amount was not enough. Fortunately, it was free of charge. Otherwise, she would be a spendthrift. The old man used his sleeve to wipe the wine and smiled. This young master's vision is accurate, very accurate. Do you also practice the spear? Generally speaking, without 10 or 20 years of practice, you can't really see the depth of my 2 grandsons. Su Fengnian shook his head and smiled. I don't practice the spear, but there are some people around me who are experts. After watching for a long time, I can understand a little. The old man joked. If that's the case, then young master should be an expert. Su Fengnian also joked, probably a little high. The handsome youth coldly snorted, while the tall youth held back his laughter. He had never seen such a shameless person. The old man didn't take it to heart. When interacting with people, he wasn't afraid of those who showed their small flaws to others, but he was afraid of those who were scheming. The old man sighed and lamented, don't be fooled by how popular pewter spears are in the Liyang army nowadays. In fact, this kind of material has always been considered inferior in the spear manual. It has an extremely bad reputation, it's too soft, and its toughness is all fake. When a layman wields it, he might be able to shake out some beautiful spear moves, but those street vendors, with spear tips at the throat and spear bodies that curve in a big arc, which one of them isn't a pewter spear? Give him a Baoyong spear and try it. Do you dare? Speaking of this, our Baoyong really put in a lot of effort. Among the world's most famous wood for making spears, the red and white cowhide wood from the Guangling Road, the red ridge wood and red ridge wood from the old southern Tang dynasty, and the slightly inferior Cushio tea stick. All of them are good materials, but none of them can be found in our Baoyong. In the end, the pewter spear produced in the eastern Hunan plain was rarely seen in our Baoyong, but it was popular in the other vassal kingdoms. Why? Isn't it because the materials are cheap, the soldiers can learn to use them quickly, and they look good when they practice martial arts? This old man heard that in our border army, not to mention the heavy iron spears used by the elite soldiers, regardless of whether it's the cavalry or the gate, all of them are good wood that is as strong as iron. Just talking about the money spent, who knows how much gold and silver is spent? Especially since we have to ship them from other places to Baoyong to make spears. It's even more expensive. The maintenance of a good spear is even more expensive. After all, with so many spears being made every year, it's estimated that the tung oil used to make them can't escape. Therefore, our Baoyong cavalry is the best in the world, not just because Baoyong's athletes are born with outstanding physical strength. Su Fengnian deeply agreed. He took a sip of wine and nodded, saying, that's exactly the reason. The old man spoke enthusiastically and drank quickly. He didn't have too many misgivings when he spoke. He was slightly distracted and said, everyone knows that the impact of a cavalry spear when they charge is astonishing, but they often overlook the damage that the spear technique does to the cavalry itself. If the charge between the two armies is a one-off deal, then that's fine. But the Baimang barbarians that our Baoyong is facing aren't easy to deal with either. This requires a lot of skill when it comes to wielding a spear to kill. And this level of skill varies from person to person. In Baoyong, there are no lack of cavalry commanders and spear experts who can solve this problem. But in this old man's opinion, although it seems to be good enough, it's not really perfect. Su Fengnian asked, old sir, what do you mean? The old man hesitated for a moment, as if he was afraid that he would violate the taboo of speaking too much with a stranger. But then he thought that they were just strangers who met by chance, so why should he be so wary? Moreover, he was drinking wine, wasn't he? He continued, this old man has seen 4 or 5 types of Baoyong spears by chance. There are differences in material, weight, and length. According to the soldier type, height, arm length, and strength, it's indeed quite detailed. Compared to the army in Liyang, it's much better. But there are still things that can be dug deeper. For example, The Miao bamboo spear nicknamed Shu Fei has been treated, but it's not that easy to crack. In this old man's opinion, its spearhead should be increased by 1 or 2.5 inches. As for the iron cicada spear used by the infantry, 2 inches of the spear body is still not enough. It should be reduced by that length. At this point, the old man stretched out 2 fingers and gently gestured. Su Fengnian, who originally only wanted to chat casually, fell into deep thought and did not immediately jump to a conclusion. It was hard for Su Fengnian to say how heavy the tip of the Miaozhu spear should be, but Su Yanbing did mention it once. In the past, this kind of heavy spear was used to deal with the West Chu Iron Cavalry in the Spring and Autumn War, especially in the battle against the Great Halberd warriors. Almost every old Beiliang soldier who participated in the Battle of Jianghu River had deep feelings for this spear. In that battle, which was second only to the Battle of West Wall, the Su family army could directly use the iron cicada spear as a hammer. Su Yanbing said this because although the Beimang army also had heavy armor, it was still inferior to the Chu dynasty even after more than 20 years of prosperity. Beimang also had light cavalry, so the iron cicada spear did not need to be so heavy. However, the reform involved not only the countless interests of the border army, but also the most troublesome feelings. Many old cavalry generals objected fiercely when Wu Tongyin implemented the reform that involved a series of specific matters. One of them was the iron cicada spear. An old general directly refuted with such a vulgar reason. I am used to hugging a plump wife. I would rather not have a light woman. Whoever likes it can have it. After all, none of my soldiers are willing to accept it. At that time, Wu Tongyin had sent a large pile of documents to Su Fengnian to read. When Su Fengnian saw this, Su Fengnian took it as a rather refreshing joke. He thought that it would be better to let nature take its course and did not have the intention to force it to be implemented. As the old man continued to speak, he said, I am used to hugging a plump wife. I would rather not have a light woman. Whoever likes it can have it. After all, none of my soldiers are willing to accept it. At that time, Wu Tongyin had sent a large pile of documents to Su Fengnian to read. When Su Fengnian saw this, Su Fengnian took it as a rather refreshing joke. He thought that it would be better to let nature take its course and did not have the intention to force it to be implemented. It is not expensive, only 6 taels of silver. It is just that I cannot afford it, so I can only shamelessly look at it and not buy it. There are more than 10,000 words, really haggling over every penny. Looking at it is amazing. I have never been on the battlefield, but when I look at it, I feel like I am fighting against a martial arts expert. My whole body is cold. The white-clothed immortal soldier, who is loved by His Majesty, even has the rules of where the toilets in the barracks should be built in the book. The soldiers he brought out only need to follow the rules. No wonder Yi Baikue, the military saint of West Chu, said that if you fight against this person, once you lose your power, you will not be able to recover. The tall youth blinked and asked, Grandpa, what do you mean? The old man sighed and said, It means that if you fight with this person, as long as he takes the initiative, you can only wait to lose, regardless of whether you have the advantage in numbers or not. This principle is actually the same as us martial artists competing in martial arts. It's just that you haven't reached that level yet, so you won't understand. The old man fiercely gulped down a mouthful of wine and said sullenly, How can such a magnificent military book fall into the hands of the common people? Aren't you afraid that the northern barbarians will take it? How many more of our Beiliang will die then? The old man sighed and didn't even want to drink anymore. He muttered to himself, Chen Jibao indeed lost to the current king of Beiliang and didn't become the ruler of Beiliang. But this isn't a reason for the Beiliang army to ruin his hard work. Our new King Liang. Isn't he going to do something about it? Or is he doing this on purpose because he has a personal grudge? If that's really the case, then this old man will really look down on him. Su Fengnian's expression changed slightly. The Beiliang army had never purposely banned the essentials of military preparation. Back then, Su Shao and Chen Jibao didn't have any objections to it. This was probably the conceit of the higher-ups of Beiliang. Su Fengnian also didn't have the intention to slander Chen Jibao's military book just because Chen Jibao left Liang and entered the capital and became the king of Shu. In reality, even Chen Jibao's old subordinates still treated him well. He personally and severely dealt with a few cases where he deliberately suppressed Chen Jibao's old subordinates and promoted them. However, in the past 6 months, Su Fengnian had personally written and carefully read through at least 8,000 copies of official documents. Not a single one had mentioned the essentials of military preparation in the marketplace. But this still made Su Fengnian feel very guilty. At this time, he subconsciously picked up his wine bowl and drank a mouthful of wine. Then he said softly, "The king of Bailiang has indeed made a great mistake in this matter." The old man dismissed it with a smile. How dare they, the common people, point fingers at the vassal king? Were they tired of living? Besides, who was the publicly recognized #1 person in the world after Wang Xianji in Martial Emperor City? Even the most ignorant rural women and children in the northern Liang region probably knew about it. Su Fengnian raised his head and asked, "Sir, with your knowledge of the spear, why didn't you join the border army?" Chapter 1208. The old man revealed a painful expression and tried his best to make his tone light. "It's true that my family is used to using spears, but before my family fell, I didn't like to get involved with the rich and powerful. I only hope that everyone in my family can practice martial arts in peace, and one day bring our family's spear techniques to greater heights. As for other things, I never thought too much about it. My ancestors said that practicing the spear is to train the heart. If the heart is too messy, you won't be able to practice a good spear. To people like us who use spears, it's tantamount to neglecting the essentials." Su Fengnian calmly said 3 words, "Sun family's spear." The old man, who was originally kind and friendly like a neighbor's elder, suddenly changed. He lowered his hand and grabbed the white candle on the bench. His turbid eyes shone brightly and were filled with murderous intent. The 2 young men stood up almost at the same time and gripped the wooden poles in their hands tightly. This made the lady boss, who was eating melon seeds, jump in fright. She was stunned on the spot. Su Fengnian gently held the wine bowl and didn't rush to drink. He smiled and said, "I don't have any bad intentions. Since I have a friend who is an expert in spear, of course I know about the famous Sun family from the same hometown as spear immortal Wang Xiu. Old Mister also told me so much. I'm just guessing. I've also heard a little about the Sun family's misfortune. Back then, a young man called He Wushu came to learn martial arts. The old man of the Sun family saw that he had a good foundation, but his conduct was not good, so he ignored him. After He Wushu was rejected, he had a few fortuitous encounters and soared all the way to success. He became Sun Denyo's bodyguard instructor, who used to be a general in the border army. This person was born to be petty and had always held a grudge against the Sun family. After the old man of the Sun family passed away, he relied on the Sun family's background and the connections he accumulated in the government to accuse the Sun family of betraying the Liang. Of the 40 people, only 6 escaped, including 2 infants. In the past 10 years, 3 of the Sun family members died under He Wushu's spear. 2 of them were not as skilled as others, and 1 of them secretly betrayed the Sun family. However, after the old man of the Sun family passed away, he relied on the Sun family's background and the connections he accumulated in the government to accuse the Sun family of betraying the Liang. Of the 40 people, only 6 escaped, including 2 infants. In these 10 years, 3 of the Sun family members died under He Wushu's spear. 2 of them were not as skilled as others, and 1 of them secretly betrayed the Sun family. But after the old man of the Liang, he didn't get a chance. Sun Qingqiu, old master Sun, am I right? The old man's face was as cold as water. He sneered and said in a desolate tone, Good. What a tiger head spear proclamation. Sure enough, after joining the fish dragon gang, you're like a tiger that has grown wings. You actually chased me all the way here. When the old man agreed, he threw a glance at the 2 youths. He wanted the 2 children to run for their lives without caring about him, so he couldn't refuse. However, how could the young man escape at this moment? His feet were rooted to the ground, and he did not retreat an inch. This made the old man not know whether to feel happy or sad. The spear of the Sun clan would not retreat until the person was dead. Su Fengnian was still holding his wine bowl. He mocked himself. Old man's son, do I look like a henchman of Wushu? Or do they look like assassins who are chasing after you? But who in the world would treat someone to a drink before killing someone like me? The tall youth said angrily, You bastard, you must have poisoned the wine. The proprietress was not happy at all. She had roughly heard some clues from the conversation. She didn't believe that the young man was a bad person at all. Who asked him to be so handsome? She slammed the table and said angrily, What are you talking about? Do I look like a gangster's shop? Your wine was personally served by me. It's new wine that has just been opened. Child, which eye of yours saw the young master poisoning the wine? Su Fengnian asked directly, Old man's son, do you really think that the three of you are a match for me alone? The old man didn't say anything. He didn't relax at all, but his expression was dejected. After roaming the Jianghu for most of his life, especially after more than a decade of running for his life, the old man had developed a pair of discerning eyes and a sharp intuition for danger. The moment he reached out to grab the pole, the young man beside him, whose aura was like that of an ordinary person, flashed with a shocking aura. The old man had no choice but to admit that he was no match for him at all. Su Fengnian asked, Old man's son, I have a presumptuous request. I want you to go to the border army to be a military instructor who teaches spear techniques. However, I won't care about the grievances between the Sun clan and Wu Shu. I don't think you would want others to interfere. The old man laughed coldly. This young master of unknown origin, don't think that just because you have some martial arts skills that you can talk big. I'm not that ignorant, child. I know that the military instructor of our Bailiang army is a 4th-level general. If you were talking about an ordinary instructor position, I would think that you were a son of a general with an extraordinary status and believe you. Is the position of military instructor something you can give away just because you say so? Do you think you're the administrator's son, Li Hanlin? Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. He didn't expect Li Hanlin to be so famous in Bailiang now. It sounded like a good reputation. The delicate young man standing to Su Fengnian's side like he was facing a great enemy looked at this man's evil smile and wanted to kill him with one blow. Chapter 1209. Su Fengnian truly did not know how to convince Sun Qingqiu, but this old man was very likely to be a huge treasure to the Bailiang army. If used well, it could allow the border army's fighting strength to reach a higher level. It could be said that Sun Qingqiu, who had displayed his skills and completely instilled his entire life's worth of knowledge into Bailiang, was even more beneficial to Bailiang than Han Lao's Han, Wang Xiu's junior brother, who is currently the deputy general of Lingzhou. Of course, all of this was just a possibility, but if they missed it, then it would not even be a possibility anymore. Su Fengnian raised his hand. This movement very quickly attracted the old man's swift and violent spear attack. The wax spear did not seem to have any momentum, but it slanted downwards, accurately and viciously stabbing towards Su Fengnian's throat. It was clean and crisp, and it contained the essence of the Sun family spear technique, pressing forward courageously. In the end, the two youths saw the spearhead of the wax spear stop several inches away from the person. Then the wax spear, which was in line with the Sun family's unique no-return aura, was instantly squeezed out in a large arc and then shattered on the spot. After Su Fengnian raised his hand, a young woman in tight black clothes mysteriously appeared in the shade of the tree. After seeing this scene, her exquisite figure was completely expressionless. She was the death warrior, Fan Shaochai, who had just left the whisk room not long ago. Sun Qingqiu held half of the wax spear. His palm was split open and covered in blood. Even though the old man was already certain that he was not this person's opponent, his spear attack returning without any result still shocked the old man too much. He believed that this spear attack of his was something that even those second-level experts who were usually elusive would not be able to deal with so lightly. Moreover, this young man sitting there did not move at all. There was not even the slightest movement of his qi. Su Fengnian did not look at Fan Shaochai. He only said, "You don't have to follow me for a while. Take the old man to the border of Liangzhou and find Lu Qiuer. I have already decided on the official position. As for how to use the Sun family's spear technique, let Lu Qiuer decide for herself." Then, Su Fengnian asked with a smile, "Old master, are you sure you don't want to make a profitable business?" The old man was an open-minded person. After thinking for a while, he sighed and said, "Anyway, I have no choice. Let's see if God wants to destroy my Sun family. I don't believe that he Wu Shu, a branch leader of the Fish Dragon Gang, can order you around." Su Fengnian breathed a sigh of relief and asked tentatively, "Would you like to leave after we finish the wine?" The old man sat down. "Drink. Why aren't you drinking?" The two youths trembled as they returned to their seats. Especially the delicate and pretty youth. He was completely dumbfounded. As for the hot-headed and tall youth, his face was filled with worship. He must have really met the legendary otherworldly expert. So when this young master said that he was a little tall, he was really tall? After this incomparably excited youth sat down, he anxiously asked, "Master, young master, my grandfather always said that my talent in martial arts is not very good. Your vision must be higher than my grandfather's. Why don't you help me take a look? Could it be that I'm actually a martial arts genius? Su Fengnian looked at the youth and said calmly, logically speaking, you are still a long way from your grandfather's age. The youth opened his mouth wide and still did not give up. With a sad face he asked, What? Master, young master, don't make a mistake. Can you take a closer look? Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. It's harder to make a mistake than not to make a mistake. The youth sighed and drooped his head, not saying anything. The delicate and pretty youth covered his mouth and snickered. But when the master, who was not as repulsive as before, looked in his direction, he subconsciously glared at him. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Practice your spear well. You will have a great future. No one said that a woman can't practice a fierce and invincible first-rate spear art. The youth blushed. The proprietress, who had been startled many times, looked at this youth. No wonder he looked like a little girl. The woman was really stupid and bold. She joked, Master, young master, you can't not pay for the wine just because you are a master. Su Fengnian took out a small piece of silver and put it on the table. The proprietress smiled and said, Oh, you really didn't pay a cent more. Master, young master. You are a master. Can't you be a little more generous? Aren't you afraid that it will damage your master's demeanor? Fan Xiaochai, a loyalist not far away, recalled all the things that had happened to her. She began to admire the courage of this village woman. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Only the master knows that oil and salt are expensive. Nowadays, I don't have the capital to puff myself up at my own cost. Su Fengnian suddenly saw the blue and white falcon circling overhead. He slowly got up and said, Grandfather, I have something to do. I will go first. We will come back to the border of Jianghu to drink with you. I believe there will be a chance. Sun Qingqiu also stood up and nodded, not saying anything. Su Fengnian disappeared in a flash after he finished speaking. This made the woman and the two Sun family youths think that they had met a god or a ghost. Fan Xiaochai said coldly, After drinking, we will go to the border immediately. Sun Qingqiu grunted. The tall youth stared at this elder sister with his eyes wide open. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The girl dressed as a man was a little envious. She was really a beautiful elder sister, but she gave people the impression that she was too cold. The proprietress sitting at the next table patted her chest hard and said, Today was really an eye-opener. The old man took a sip of wine, narrowed his eyes and said softly, Who said it wasn't? Fan Xiaochai stood in the shade with her eyes closed. Her intuition told her that Bei Mang should have sent out troops. She had no interest in the ups and downs of the three Sun family members. As for that Fu Wuxia of the Fish Dragon Gang, perhaps for the three of them, he was an enemy that they wanted to kill for the rest of their lives but couldn't. But the gap between her and her enemy was like the distance between heaven and earth. She knew that she would never be able to kill this man with her own hands in this lifetime. After all, even Wang Xianji couldn't kill him. But this didn't mean that he wouldn't die. Because he had to face the whole of Bei Mang. Chapter 12:10. Su Fengnian quietly returned to Mount Qingliang. Just as Fan Xiaochai had predicted, Bei Mang had indeed begun to move their troops southward. Moreover, they had divided their troops into 3 groups, each attacking the 3 provinces separately. This was very different from what Beiliang had expected, because the position of King of the South had been vacant after Su Huainan's death. The position of King of the North had been vacant since then, and King of the North, who was not even a feudal official, had become the second most powerful man in the world. Even Su Fengnian was not sure if it was the meticulous plan of Taiping Commandery, or if it was Dongzhuo's deliberate pestering. Most of the time, it was said that the smart people were good at dealing with changes by sticking to the status quo. However, this kind of military affair that involved the final trend of the 2 dynasties was like a fight between 2 masters. Not only did it test the depth of their internal energy, it also tested the scheming of both sides. The lesson of being greedy for small gains and losing big gains was especially taboo. The lesson of winning a series of battles but losing the overall situation could be seen in the recent spring and autumn period. The reason why Su Fengnian had such a headache was that Beiliang's resources were far inferior to Bei Mang's. Empress Murong was able to confidently launch a 3-pronged attack. On one hand, she had sent Tuoba to lead the troops to suppress the grasslands in Norland. On the other hand, she had used the elite cavalry of Southern Dynasty to provoke Beiliang. She could even send a large number of troops to the Eastern Front, eyeing the borderline that Gu Jiantang had built. Of course, even an idiot would know that the final confrontation on the Eastern Front, Li Yang and Liang Mang were well aware of it. They were just putting on airs. Otherwise, they would not have left the 3 trading towns in the northern pass of Ji province open. When Su Fengnian, who was sitting alone in the pavilion in the middle of Tide Hark Lake, thought of this, a wry smile crept up the corner of his mouth. He had used his army to force Great Peace City to submit to him, and had no choice but to loosen the embargo on transporting grain to Liao province. He had also indirectly admitted that Lu province was the rightful ruler of Liuzhou, and Song Dongming had overstepped his authority. Therefore, the imperial court immediately retaliated, and did not even bother to find a fig leaf. It was said that the trade at the northern border of Ji province was much livelier than usual. Yuan Tingshan, who was once threatened by Su Fengnian to be skinned alive, was thrown into the border of Ji province by his foster father, Gu Jiantang. Now, he had become the commandant of horse tampering with 4,000 old soldiers of Ji province, and had more than 20 forts of various sizes under his command. At the same time, he was also in charge of 3 counties, and his territory was getting closer and closer to Beiliang. The power he had in his hands was almost equal to half a provincial governor and a general with real power. No doubt, this was a silent mockery of Su Fengnian, the vassal king of Beiliang. Especially after Li Huali, the eldest son of Wild Goose Castle in Ji province, died suddenly in Quick Snow Mountain Villa. Yuan Tingshan, who was very popular in the border area of Liang dynasty, was about to become the son-in-law of Wild Goose Castle, marrying the famous woman who was known as Li Jiaxuan. In addition, Yuan Tingshan had a very close relationship with the first prince, Zhao Wu, of Liao province. It could be said that Yuan Tingshan's wings were fully grown, and even the nobles in Great Peace City no longer treated him as the foster son of Gu Jiantang. Yuan Tingshan, as a stray dog, had become a shining star in the dynasty in just 2 years. There were even some people who were secretly adding fuel to the fire, and had raised Yuan Tingshan to the position of Su Fengnian's mortal enemy. Su Fengnian sat on a bench in the pavilion with 2 boxes of chess pieces on his knees. He held a dozen or so round and pleasant chess pieces. As time passed, they were soaked in his warmth and were no longer cold. Su Fengnian's thoughts drifted to the Tai and city that he hated and feared in his heart when he was young. He smiled. Just like when he was young, he always felt that Mount Qingliang was the highest mountain in the world. Only after he left Liangzhou did he know that Mount Wudong had 81 peaks. After he left Beiliang, he saw many magnificent mountains and rivers with his own eyes. With the increase of experience, many of the deep-rooted thoughts of the past involuntarily faded away. After Qi Yanglong, the Grand Chancellor of Shangyin Academy, entered Taiyan City, even the slow-witted officials sensed a storm brewing. Although Grand Chancellor Qi only held an idle job in the Imperial College for the time being, and his official rank was far inferior to the Right Chancellor Jean Lanting, what was even more incomprehensible was that the Imperial College had 7 schools under its jurisdiction. It was only after Gu Jiantang stepped down as the Minister of War that he was allowed to add martial arts. However, Grand Chancellor Qi, who was as knowledgeable as the sky, chose to be the supervisor of the least popular martial arts. In terms of quality, he was barely on par with the Imperial College. In terms of quality, he was barely on par with the officials of the Imperial College. In terms of the original position in the Imperial College, the director of the martial arts, who had been neglected, was a whole imperial road away from the Imperial College. But in fact, those scholars who used to be considered clean and honest in the capital weren't even qualified to carry Qi Yanglong's shoes. During this period of time, not to mention the hundreds of officials from the Imperial College led by Jean Lanting, even the tens of thousands of students in the Imperial College were anxious. Those whose family backgrounds belonged to the upper class and who switched from the Imperial College to the martial arts overnight didn't even need to cry and shout to enter the martial arts school. Their family backgrounds were only average in the capital. They didn't even need to cry and shout that they wanted to enter the martial arts school. Their parents had already started to use silver to build connections. It was tacky to give silver. However, the Liang dynasty was so prosperous that it had created a prosperous situation that had never been seen in thousands of years. The capital was also the richest city in the world. Who didn't have a few rare calligraphy and paintings? In particular, those that had been stamped with the word fake, were the best stepping stones to smoothly enter the doors of the big bosses of the Ministry of Rights. No matter how much the people of the capital cursed the young man in Beiliang, when it came to the identification of authentic works, that guy's picky eyes were very convincing. As long as he recklessly wasted a natural treasure and labeled it as a fake, It was 100% authentic. Moreover, although the young man's surname was Su and not Zhao, he had now become a proper vassal king and had defeated old monster Wang, who was recognized as invincible in the world. As long as he had his seal, no matter if it was square or round, a calligraphy or painting could be sold at a sky-high price in the capital. Su Fengnian didn't have any feelings about this matter. He was more concerned about the direction of the murderous battle between the dragon and the deer that was about to happen. According to the secret report, this Grand Chancellor, who was praised as a person who could be compared with 1,000,000 soldiers, was not really making a small fuss in the martial arts field of the Imperial College. Instead, he began to compile new scriptures under the instructions of the Emperor of the Zhao family. He even used his official status to explain the complete meaning of the Confucian sage for the first time for the Zhao family. It seemed to be icing on the cake for the imperial examination, but in fact, it was to shake the foundation of Zhonglu. This time, Qi Yonglong took the lead in compiling the classics. Just by looking at the two assistants, one could see how much importance the emperor attached to him. The left chancellor of the Imperial College, Yao Baifeng, and the Grand Secretary, Yan Jieshi, who was a relative of the emperor, were only assistants to Qi Yonglong. Was Qi Yonglong really just compiling a few volumes of books? He was setting the rules for all the scholars in the world for hundreds of years from now on. Su Fengnian clenched the chess piece in his hand and said to himself, "It's okay if Bai Yan loses. Anyway, Zhonglu has always been hostile to Bailiang. If Qi Yonglong can still suppress Bai Yan, Bailiang's situation will only get worse and worse in the future, won't it? Do I have the extravagant hope that Sage Qi, who is destined to accompany the sacrificial ceremony in the Imperial Ancestral Temple, will treat Bailiang differently?" Mr. Wang, who lost the debate between heaven and man, said that Qi Yonglong had always had a deep hatred for all the vassals including Bailiang. He once said, "You can be crowned as a king, but you can't split the land." At first glance, you can tell that he is an imperial tutor who works for the emperor. However, compared with his student Sun Ping, Qi Yonglong is undoubtedly much more experienced and tactful. He knows when he should not go out of the mountain and when he should. Anyway, he has the final say in protecting himself and helping the world. First, it was Bai Mang's peace decree, then it is Qi Yonglong. Can't there be fewer opponents like this? Su Fengnian sighed and withdrew his gaze. Great Peace City is always worrisome. The Bailiang Palace under my feet is also not a small courtyard with a gentle breeze.